All right, looks like it's 9 o'clock, so let's go ahead and start the February 15th, 2023 Traffic Sanitation Agency Board of Directors meeting. And if everyone could join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, that would be great. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And roll call. And I understand some combination of Richard and Vicki are filling in for Rochelle today.
Yeah, so it's going to be a team effort. So
okay.
I'll do roll call. President Wilkins.
Present.
Vice President Trayson.
Here.
Director Smelser.
Here.
Director Cox.
Yes.
And Director Wilson.
Here.
And I believe because Director Cox is remote, we'll have to do roll call for all votes.
Correct.
Okay. Next on the agenda is public comment. This is an opportunity for any person to make comments to the board for up to 5 minutes for any items not on the agenda. Is there any public comment? Seeing none. And just so I'm clear, this is actually an in-person meeting with Director Cox being remote as compared to a hybrid meeting where, so we don't have members of the public that are able to log in remotely, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Next on so seeing no public comment, we'll move on to consent. One item on the consent calendar, which would be ratification of the general fund warrants. Anyone want to pull the consent item, or would anyone like to move approval?
I'll move.
Moved by Dave.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Wilson.
Roll call.
Roll call, please.
President Wilkins.
Yes. Present and supported of the item.
Vice President Trayson.
Yes.
Director Smelser.
Yes.
Director Cox.
Yes.
And Director Wilson.
Yes.
Thank you. Next is first item on our regular agenda, which is the report from the January 18th, 2023 closed session meeting. Are you handling that, Andrew? The report out?
I'm happy to. There was no reportable action coming out of closed session at the prior meeting.
Great. Thank you. Next on the agenda is approval of the minutes of the regular board meeting on January 18th, 2023. Would anyone like to either approve the minutes, make a motion to approve the minutes, or have any comments on the minutes?
I had one comment request to amend.
Okay.
And that's on page 29, item 5, or no, item 8, discussion approval of agency investments, where it says motion by Director Treason, second by Smelser, to approve the investment of $8 million in unrestricted funds in the 12-month ladder and $10 million in restricted funds in FDIC insured CDs. The motion was actually a motion to invest up to those amounts because there was some wanted to give staff that flexibility to invest lesser amounts based on possible changes in reserves and the need for liquidity.
Okay. So your request is that the minutes be approved with that modification?
Yes.
And is
I'll second that.
We'll make the changes.
staff's clear on what the requested modifications are? Okay. We got a motion by Director Trezin, second by Director Schmelzer. Any further discussion? Seeing none, roll call please.
President Wilkins.
Yes.
Vice President Trayson.
Yes.
Director Smelser.
Yes.
Director Cox.
Yes.
And Director Wilson.
Yes.
Thank you. Next is discussion and approval of the updated maintenance manager job description.
Okay, it's listed for Vicki, but I'm going to take it since she's helping out. We brought this last month to make some adjustments in review, in finalizing for posting. We noticed under the definition, the position now oversees the SCADA and IT departments as well, so we just added verbiage to include that as part of the group that the maintenance manager would provide management to. So we just wanted to bring it back, let you know we needed to make that change. So we actually did make a change that was minor so we could get it posted, but we wanted to still be transparent and bring it to the board for approval.
Great. Is there any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none. Is there any public comment? Seeing none. Would anyone like to make a motion?
Also move.
Second.
Moved by Director Trezin, second by Director Wilson to approve the updated maintenance manager job description. Roll call, please, Richard.
President Wilkins,
Yes.
Vice President Pearson,
Yes.
Director Smelser,
Yes.
Director Cox,
Yes.
and Director Wilson.
Yes.
Next on the agenda is discussion and approval of the vehicle usage policy.
Yeah, I'm going to take that one as well. So to meet IRS code as well as get a policy in place to line up with the employee handbook, Vicki drafted a vehicle use policy that's before you. So we're seeking approval for that so we can ratify it and put it in our administrative manual.
Thank you. Is there any questions or comments from board members on this?
Was there any significant change from our current vehicle use policy?
I would say we really didn't have a vehicle use policy. There was
Okay.
some minor vague references to it, I think, in the handbook originally, but it was not a standalone policy that covered all aspects.
I had a question about on page 2, item 2. How does it actually work that you keep track of all the mileage and commuting and stuff? How does that?
Each individual that's using a vehicle will keep track of their mileage and
So it's
commute.
okay, up to the individual.
Yeah, and then we provide each of the ones that are assigned as take-home vehicles to staff. They work with admin to record that data.
Okay.
Right. So I had a couple of comments. So my understanding is that this policy is really restricted. The only well, let me back up a moment. So I believe we've got 3 senior management staff members that, as a part of their compensation package, are granted use of an agency vehicle for take-home purposes. Basically, just getting to and from work.
Yeah.
No private use beyond that.
Right, three senior management and then the chief plant operator. So
Okay.
4 vehicles.
There's 4 vehicles that are in that category that are part of the compensation package.
Correct.
Does this vehicle use policy apply to those 4 vehicles, or does this policy really just apply to other vehicles that may be taken home from time to time?
Both.
Both.
It provides guidance for the vehicles that are provided as part of the compensation, as well as any time agency vehicles used for any agency business.
Okay, so we've got the 4 vehicles that are part of the compensation package, and then we've got a policy that if staff members are requested to be on standby, and I assume what that means is that's us paying a person to be available to come into work should circumstances create the need for that. That in that scenario, a person could be eligible to take a vehicle home as well if that's approved by the department manager.
That's correct.
Okay, so I think that's fine. My personal opinion is that when the department manager is making that decision, that it should really be based on what's the likelihood that that employee, in responding to a call-in when they're on standby, is likely going to need to report to a location that's something other than this facility. So, just my general philosophy is that we should be minimizing take-home vehicles as a general practice, and that if we're providing for take-home vehicles, it's one thing that if I'll use the example of a police officer that has a take-home vehicle because they might have to respond to some emergency that's in the field, and rather than having to travel all the way into a police facility to pick up a vehicle, then get out to wherever the emergency is, they can go straight there. There's response time issues. That has a legitimate agency purpose in my mind. If the likely scenario of a person being on standby needing to respond to the Truckee River Interceptor in Tahoe City, if that's the scenario that we're planning for, then a take-home vehicle might, in my opinion, make sense in that circumstance. If the likely scenario is that they're reporting here to the plant, and they're basically being paid to be on standby, they're also being paid to come in and work for the day, that would not be a circumstance, at least, that I would be supportive of paying or providing a take-home vehicle for. So
Okay.
that's just my opinion on it, and I just wanted to throw that out for staff's information as you're making those decisions.
Okay.
So
We know it. And so far to date, that has been the only time a vehicle has been utilized by someone on call, was when we had a power outage along the TRI and we had the fuel generators. So we've kind of met that requirement so far. But we'll duly noted.
Okay. Okay, are there any other questions or comments? If not, would anyone like to make a motion to approve the vehicle usage policy?
Also,
Moved by Director Schmelzer, second by Director Wilson. Roll call, please.
President Wilkins,
Yes.
Vice President Tristan,
Yes.
Director Smeltzer,
yes?
Director Cox,
Yes.
and Director Wilson.
Yes.
All right, next on our agenda is ratification and approval of financial statements.
Yeah, we've changed it up a little bit today so Dale can hear us a little better since the camera's over here. So everyone's going to make their presentations from the podium.
Okay.
Sorry, I have to use my loud voice because I was part of the person that he couldn't hear. From the last board meeting, we tabled approving the financial statements for November, December, and January due to a discrepancy that the finance team had to research. We found that the cash in total is correct, which there's no worries about that, but the cash amounts in each of the fund balances is incorrect. There was when we transitioned to Cassell, there was a part of that transition that did not get handled correctly, and it's related to intercompany accounts, which is between the funds. That high level, when cash transactions happen between funds, it goes through the cash account. When non-cash transactions happen, it should go through an intercompany account. We do need to make an adjusting entry for this, and we have not closed our fiscal year 22 financials, so we will make the adjusting entry in fiscal 22. I don't have a total dollar amount yet. We are still putting more information together, and we have to have a follow-up conversation with the auditors. But high estimate is $7 million from Fund 2 to Fund 10, and that's the restricted fund. And then high estimate for Fund 6 is I had it written down. I think it was $3 million from Fund 6 to Fund 10. At the next board meeting and the next financial committee, we should have the exact dollars for that and a corrected combined cash statement showing the correct amounts. I want to make it known that the change in these balances do not impact the sewer rate study, because we gave him beginning balances, I believe, from May of 2022. So that was prior to these entries affecting the cash between funds. The request here is first, are there any questions on the current financials for January or any of the three? And then the management request is that you approve the financial statements as they are, knowing that the combined cash statement will be updated and changed once we have the final numbers.
Okay. Any questions or comments?
Just that Scott and I, went over this in pretty major depth with Crystal and Richard in the finance committee meeting, and I want to applaud Crystal for digging into this and getting the books straight. And so, we're recommending that we approve the financials with the understanding that there will be a journal entry adjustment to the fund balances made at a future date.
Okay.
And they will be reflected in the fiscal 22 financial statements and audit. And because we report in consolidation, there was no impact to the fiscal 21 audit.
Okay. Any additional questions or comments? Any public comment? Seeing none, would anyone? So the recommendation is to go ahead and approve these financial statements, recognizing there will be some modifications in the future.
The modification will be to the combined cash statement, not the financial statements.
Okay.
The financial statements are correct.
Okay. Okay. Clear as mud, but I trust that that you guys are on top of it. So,
Yeah.
all right. Would anyone like to make a motion?
Also move.
Moved by Director
I'll
Trezin,
second.
seconded by Director Smeltzer. Roll call, please.
President Wilkins,
Yes.
Vice President Tracy,
Yes.
Director Smeltzer,
Yes.
Director Cox,
Yes.
Director Wilson.
Yes.
Great. Next on the agenda is presentation and discussion of the sewer rate study by HDR Engineering.
I'll go ahead and introduce Sean, which I know everybody here already knows him. Make a couple of notes. This is the presentation of the updated version of the financial rate study. I will steal his thunder, but I did. Can I mention the calendar I have? I did hand out an updated calendar to everybody, and there are handouts available to the public reflecting the new dates for the sewer rate study. Please note that today is to walk away with accepting of one of the schedule alternatives that are presented at the March 15th board meeting, with the expectation of adopting and approving or accepting the rate study recommendation, and setting the public hearing for May 17th. The updated date for sending out the final notice to customers is March 30th. That gives us a little flexibility to accommodate the 45, no later than March 30th, to accommodate the no less than 45-day requirement of Prop 218, and then May 17th potential for the public hearing. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sean.
Thank you. You have a presentation. Look at that. Thank you. So I'll go brief on some of the upfront stuff. This is really, based on the direction we received from you all last. I was here when we presented the information. I've added a few new slides that I'll talk through. Also added a new scenario or an alternative for the board's consideration. But as Crystal mentioned, really what we're looking for here is some kind of final general direction to move this forward so we can finalize that Prop 218 notification and set up the process for adopting rates as we go into the future. So on the next slide, and we'll go through these pretty quickly up front, we'll talk about the purpose, an overview, and then talk about the alternatives. And if you have questions as we go through, go ahead and stop me and make sure I explain things, because again, we've added some slides in between here as we go through. So on the next slide, we've got are really looking at what you all told us last time, some of the questions, comments that we received. We'll provide that overview, and then, as Crystal mentioned, going into those next steps for the 218 process. On slide 4, we've got the purpose of the rate study, and really, again, we're just putting together a rate transition plan that will sufficiently fund your operating and capital expenses. And as we go through that, as Crystal mentioned, we have a couple different funds that we're looking at. The primary piece that we're looking at today is our Fund 6 and Fund 10, right? That's Fund 2 is kind of on its own on the side. It's connection fee funded. We've gone through that process, so we're looking at that balance. And as Crystal mentioned, our reserves, I started with the numbers prior to the adjustment for this current fiscal year. So I'm actually starting back almost where it looks like you may land. So I think from that perspective, cash flow wise, we're looking okay based on what we're seeing to date as we go through this. The other key part as we go through this is making sure we're meeting debt service coverage ratios. As you all remember, if you don't, we'll kind of look at it briefly. We're looking at issuing additional long-term debt to fund capital improvements, so making sure that we're maintaining the adequate financial metrics as we go through this is really that goal and process that we're focusing on. So on the next slide, we have our process, revenue requirement, cost of service, rate design. We're going to focus on the revenue requirement. That's really those rate alternatives. Since we bill on an EDU basis or equivalent dwelling unit basis, then that's where our cost of service component comes in, is looking at those ratios. Why is each per seat X number of EDUs as compared to one EDU for a single family home? That's where we take care of the cost of service. So we'll focus on the revenue requirement, the overall rate adjustment needs, and then we'll look at the rates that fall out of that based on the analysis. So skipping into the study results, and we can go to the next one. One of the questions or discussions we had was on overall capital, and there's a lot of words here, don't worry too much about that. But really what we're looking at is we took the master plans that were completed for the agency, we walked through those with staff. Staff adjusted the capital plan based on what they knew. Again, that plan was done a year or two ago as you went through that process. So items were shifted, costs were updated, just given the impacts we've seen from inflation and supply chain issues. And then we developed that capital funding analysis based around that plan. So that was really our starting point for that as we went through that. We did include a higher level of inflation in this upcoming fiscal year and the next fiscal year, and then we kind of leveled that out in the out years. So we tried to capture what we've been seeing lately as part of that. As we think about that, again, remember Fund 2 is our connection fee funded, so that's kind of on a side calculation to make sure that we have sufficient cash flow. And then our Fund 6 and 10 is really our renewal and replacement component, and that's really what we focused on for that discussion. Remember, those projects, those renewal and replacement projects, are really funded through a mix of available reserves and total revenues, so that may be rate revenues or other revenues, which is primarily the property tax revenue, and then annual service charge revenues as we go through that. And that's one of the goals of this study as we looked at that, is also as we transition revenues to adequately fund O&M, then it's also to start setting the stage to adequately funding our renewal and replacement, making sure our Fund 6 and 10 have sufficient cash, and you can go through and implement those projects that we have out there. So this is going to be really small on the next slide. It's the capital plan. Just a couple pieces. One of the questions was, how did we get to that $5 million in the out years? And there's a whole list of projects, as you can see here, but a couple of the key ones that we can focus on. The top highlighted one, that's the TRI renewal program. So starting out in fiscal 2028, we're running at around $900,000 to $1 million a year in that program, just as our renewal and replacement piece. Coming down, we've got the plant-wide electrical improvements. So starting again in 28, around $1 million a year on average in those years. Digestion improvement, that's a big one in the short term, in the next 3 fiscal years. And then primary and secondary treatment rehab is in the next, not this upcoming fiscal year, but the following fiscal year at $1 million, $4.5 and $4.5 million. And then we've got building roof replacements, and then there's a bunch of other projects. So as we think about that, that's one of the goals I have as we develop the capital funding analysis, this renewal and replacement program, is trying to develop a rate plan that adequately funds that. That's how I came back to that $5 million, is we kind of looked at this and said, there's a lot of little things, and then there's a couple bigger projects. But as we get into the out years, it's a lot of those little things that add up to the bigger number, the total $5 million. That's what we want to be funding each year. So as we work our way up to meeting our reserve targets, then we also want to be funding that adequately through rates as we go forward so that you have that sufficient funding on an ongoing basis. So that was one of the questions we talked about. On the next slide, I have that same graph of how we're funding that. Again, this is our renewal replacement component. So as we go across the page, then we have our reserves in the orange. So in the first year, you'll see that first block in the orange. In 24 and 25, we used reserves to fund that. That's coming out of our Fund 6. Then as we transition out, that's that rate funding piece, that gray bar, the black bar on the bottom, that we try and fund annually through current ongoing revenues. We pull a little bit out of our general fund, our Fund 10, in fiscal year 25, and then we have the assumed borrowing, long-term debt in the green up there. So that's how we're funding really those big, that peak that we see there with the digestion project and other projects here at the plant where we have some larger dollars, $4 or $5 million a year, is long-term borrowing to fund those, and then we'll fund that debt service as we go forward. So one way I wanted to explain that on this slide, I'm not going to dive into this in a lot of detail. We hashed it out pretty good in the Finance Committee meeting. But what I wanted to show is that on the top box, this is how we calculate our revenues. We take our total O&M expenses, and this is kind of a generic industry standard. Taxes and transfers, which we don't have any. We're not giving money to any other inside. We don't have, like a city would have a different fund or a general fund. We don't have to worry about that here. Our annual debt service, our rate-funded capital, that's that black or gray bar at the bottom that we showed on the prior slide. That gives us our total revenue requirement. We back off our other revenues, which in your case is primarily property tax. That's the amount we need to collect from rates. And the reason we do that is we can adjust the rates on an annual basis. We can't determine, I wish we could, right, what the taxes component's going to be, right? So we just back that off and say it's funding costs as we go forward. The bottom box is that capital piece, so it's that prior chart. We take the total capital, we back out any funding sources, so whether it's borrowing, in this case connection fees wouldn't apply, but our reserves, any other funding, and what's left we have to pay through rates. So that comes up on the right-hand side back to our total, and that's our $5 million a year that we're looking at as part of that. The left side, when we issue debt, the green bars from the prior slide, we have to bring that back. And so in this case, we have about $28 million in borrowing, and we assumed at 4.5% over 20 years. Now, as you go forward and those projects come to fruition, you go through that funding plan with your financial advisors. Obviously, you'll get a set schedule, which will be developed, and then it can be reflected through the rates. So the next slide is our revenue requirement. So this is the one we talked about a little bit before. I had the dashed line going across, which showed our total revenue. So you'll see within each bar, there's a smaller bar that's blue and green. The blue smaller bar, thinner bar, is our annual rate revenues. The green thinner bar is our property tax revenues. And then there's a couple $100,000 from other miscellaneous fees and revenues. So what you can see is while the line really hasn't changed if you go across, today we're just below break even. We're actually using a little bit of reserves in 23 to balance everything out as part of that. But as we get out into 24 through 32, what you'll see is that our current levels, our current rates, plus our property tax revenue and other miscellaneous revenues, we're not even funding our O&M expenses. So that's really what we're seeing as part of the driver of the overall rate transition plan. And then it's layering on those capital needs that have been identified in the master plans to meet the overall level of service here at the plant, and then obviously as part of the interceptors that you have out there. So based on that, on the next slide, we have our overall rates need to be adjusted as we've talked about. We have the borrowing included in there. We're trying to get movement towards our reserve policies as we go forward, but making sure that we're adequately reinvesting in the system. That's the piece that generally goes away, as you've heard me talk about in the past. And so we've developed a couple different rate alternatives. And so as we think about this, I'll just remind you on the next slide, this was the rate transition plan that you've had in the past. The yellow bar are the rate adjustments that you have put in place, so nothing after 2011, 2012. kind of drops off to the bottom, whereas when we look at the orange, blue, and gray bar, that's our CPI, different CPI indices that we looked at to kind of compare to as part of that. So part of this time, you're running at that CPI-ish level. We had the big spike in 2007, 2008, and then we have no changes over the last 7-8 years or so. So on the next slide, if we would have adjusted based on the CPI, then you can see on the far right, and that's really the one I think to focus on, is if you were to have adjusted from 2011-12 based on the CPI, we'd be somewhere in the $400 range, just as a comparison point here. And I say that because if we flip the slide to the next page, and we look at what that first rate adjustment is, this is our first alternative, we would go from $306 to $387. So the second box in the numbers and the second line down in 2024. That'd be roughly where we would have been had CPI adjustments been made in the past, just as a point of reference. And then we adjust going across. So this first alternative is the one you saw before. It's the 26.5, 26.5, followed by 9.5, 7.5, and then we're inflation 3.5 after that into the out years. On an annual basis, that's about $81 in fiscal year 24. On a monthly basis, it's $6.76. So fairly reasonable from that perspective. And then we also added to the slide our debt service coverage ratio. So you can see we're just below 1 in 2024. This is a very high level calculation. As you go through the process with your financial advisors, they'll calculate that specifically based on the revenues that can and cannot be included in that. But as we go out, we meet that higher level.
But can you define a debt service coverage ratio?
Yes, thank you. So debt service coverage ratio is essentially that credit check that we would go through at home if we were to buy a car or a home. From your perspective, what they're going to require is looking at the borrowing and saying, we want to make sure you can repay this. So as a result, you're going to need to have a coverage ratio of greater than 1. If it's 1, it means total revenues less O&M divided by our annual debt service is equal. And so that gives us our 1.0 coverage. You're going to be required to have somewhere greater than that, probably 1.15, if not 1.25 as a legal minimum. We're going to want to target something greater than that, 1.25. So after you pay O&M and after you pay debt service, you would have 25% more of your revenue left, which essentially is your rate-funded capital component. So that's one reason why this line goes up. As we start adjusting rates to fund our renewal and replacement program, then we have that 25%, and actually in this case 50% or 100% more of our revenue that we're able to reinvest in the system as part of that. So that's a key item that will be looked at. Even if you go through the state revolving fund or you go through a WIFIA program, this is still a key metric. There may not be a technical legal minimum, but that's going to be to check the box to make sure that you're meeting that. They're going to want to make sure your revenues are set at a level that would meet their requirements. One of the other questions we talked about was, okay, this is great. We know we're not going to meet our minimum reserves in the short term, but when do we meet them? So under this scenario, we meet our operating reserves, which is 6 months of O&M plus UAL, by fiscal year 2036. So just kind of out into that next 5-6 year window as we go forward. Fund 2, we meet it, right? We're good throughout the time period as we looked at. We've got a couple little dips as we go out over time, but in general, we're meeting that minimum. Fund 6 is 50% of the 5-year renewal and replacement capital. We meet that in 2039, and then we have our emergency reserve that's available as part of that. So that status is good throughout the full time that we've looked at in the study. So out a little bit to meet those reserves, but ultimately we do get there into the future. The second alternative is our new one. So this is what we took from the board during our last discussion, is where can we start out and then just slowly ramp down to get to our annual 3.5%, our inflation in year 5. So what you'll see in that first line is that annual change, 9180, so a little bit greater. That's a 30% increase in the first year instead of the 26.5. And then it goes to 18.5, 13.5, 8.5, 3.5. So just kind of a glide down But again, because we reduced that second year from 26.5, we had to push up on that first year. Now we get a little bit more compounding, so we didn't have to raise it as much as we dropped the second year. But you can see on the bottom line, our coverage ratio stays about the same. Actually, is a little stronger in the short term, so I think that's a good approach for this. We meet our operating reserve in 1 year sooner as part of that, and we fund 6, our R&R fund, we meet at the same time frame. And that's really just a function of funding capital until we have available cash to actually put back into Fund 6 to meet that. Alternative 3, this is the one you've seen before. This was one-time adjustment, 70% in year 1, and then inflation after that. You can see overall we moved that meeting our operating reserve up another couple of years, so we're 2034 we meet that. 2039 is still the case for Fund 6. Again, it's just a timing of the capital and cash flow, and then we always meet our Fund 2 and our emergency component as part of that. So as we go forward, we have these 3 options based on what we've talked about. Alternative 2 was trying to reflect what you have in place, or what we talked about during the last meeting to reflect that.
Sean, in all 3 of those scenarios, you indicating the timeline for us to achieve our target reserve goals, and they extend beyond the 10-year window of the study, and so the fact that we hit them in 2035 or 2039, there's an assumption there, and it's in the technical stuff that you provided as to what capital needs we have. That's right out of the master plan, operating cost escalators in terms of salary and all that, and then you're assuming from the revenue side, a certain increase in property taxes, and then from a rate standpoint, going back at year 6 to do another 5 years at 3.5% and 3.5% again through years, into the future as well. And that's how we get there. So we're looking at a big rate increase in this first 5-year period, but we're not done. We got to realize we'll be back at the table again, assuming all the assumptions are right, and we're happy with waiting till 2039 or what some of those dates are to hit our reserve goals. We'd just be looking at that CPI kind of increase for future years in terms of our rates.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And one of the pieces that we looked at as we went through this is, thinking about how quickly do we meet those reserve targets. And we had a little bit of a discussion last time on, are those the appropriate reserve targets? So that's something that's coming in the future as part of what you're all doing. But ultimately, we have some fairly large projects in the near term. And so that's one of the items we wanted to focus on, is how are we funding those? Let's get those funded, and then start moving on those reserves. We have reasonable reserves. We're not meeting those policies, but we're getting closer to that as we go forward. So that was that balance that you talked about, is we know we have these costs. Okay, how do we get to where we really want to go in the future? So I just wanted to touch real quick on cost of service. Again, it's an EDU basis, so we look at that relationship of the per EDU charge to come back to the cost of service. So really no changes there. We've worked with staff to go through and clean things up as we talked about last time, and I've got that same chart in here to work through that process, make sure we've got our connection fee schedule and our rate schedule line up, and then B, do those ratios make sense, right? Do those reflect industry standards? And we've gone through those. We've made a few minor adjustments. Nothing significant as we go through that, but that's really the cost of service basis that we have. So here's the adjusted rate schedule. You'll see down the left what the type of customer is, beauty, barbershop, commercial establishments, the code that you all have in your system, and then the units. So number of chairs, fixture units, seats, et cetera, as we go through this. So this is alternative 2. This is the taxable area. So there's 2 rate schedules. One is the taxable area, one is the non-tax area. Those folks don't provide you with property tax revenue, so there's a slight differential in that rate. So there's another schedule that you'll see in that Prop 218 notice for the taxable and the non-taxable areas. as part of that. So if you go down to the bottom, about 4 rows up, the current residential annual rate is $306. That will go to the $398 in 2024, and then increase based on that transition plan. So the 30%, 18.5, 8.5, et cetera, as we go forward as part of that. On the schools, something I said we'd bring back to you. We didn't have this updated before it went out, but ultimately we're looking at changing that to a per 1,000 gallon. So we kind of done some back of the envelope. I'm going to make sure I've got my I's dotted and my T's crossed. So that'll be back in front of you, but it'll essentially be based on the number of students, the estimated gallons per day. So EPA and other agencies have some assumptions of what the gallons per day is for each per student at a school, with a gym, with the cafeteria, with the shower, et cetera. So we're going to work through that and finalize that number. It's looking like it's going to be in this first year somewhere in the $4 range per 1,000 gallons. That's going to recover essentially the same revenue that they have today with the rate adjustment for fiscal year 24. So we're just kind of basing it on what their costs are and then backing into that per 1,000 gallon based on the number of students and the gallons per day. I just did a quick gut check as I was doing that. Similar agency, Dublin San Ramon Services District, their regional system, which is only treatment and then some bigger interceptor pipe, not as much as you all, but some pipe. They're at about, we're proposing at about $3.30 or somewhere in that range per 1,000 for school. So it kind of fell right in that range that we've seen with other folks as part of that. How we compare, this is the annual comparison. Again, you're a little different in that you're the regional treatment only, so there's not a lot of different agencies that to compare to. But you can see going across, we're kind of right in line with our first year proposed. This is the FY24 proposed rate. Obviously, that would increase. But as I mentioned last time, not only is this not necessarily an apples to apples, just given the type of treatment, where they are in their life cycle for their infrastructure, but we do know others of these are doing rate studies or have recently completed rate studies as well, and so there's future year adjustments built into those as part of that. And then on the next slide, we have the monthly. Just to kind of look at that on monthly dollars, again, same scale of change, just because we're dividing through by months to meet that. So again, still within that reasonable range. Okay, here's a good slide. This was a question that you all asked as we went through this last time, is we can get a gut feel of what that impact is to our typical residential, right? We know it's going from $306 annually to $389 or whatever that final transition plan that the board directs us to. So the left-hand slide, I had to split these up because the scale's so different on it, and I probably should have put one on a page, so I apologize for that. This is the annual change, monthly change in the bill. So on the left-hand side, the tall bar, it gets up to about $3,100 a month. That's one of the resorts in the service area here. The next is the schools. So this is Truckee Unified. In total, it's about $1,000, $1,300 increase per month over for the first year adjustment based on Alternative 2. So this is that first year adjustment for Alternative 2. And then we have another resort, a grocery store, a restaurant, a hotel, and another restaurant. They're all in about the $100 to $200 range per month change as part of that. And then when we jump to the right-hand side, the first one's a brewery or restaurant. Then we have a government agency, a hospital, a grocery. Those are all in the $60 to $100 a month change. A couple different parks. As you go across, you see on the end 2 churches. Those are pretty minimal. They're less than $10 a month change with that 30%. And so we have all the backup information on this, but just to give you all an idea of how that may impact some of your customers. Again, it's essentially across the board, so the impact that these folks are seeing is the same percentage-wise as a single-family home. The dollars are obviously different, right? Especially when you look at the left-hand chart, some of your bigger customers, they're going to have a bit of a substantial change in their bill as we go up. Well, this is Alternative 2, so it's the 30% increase.
The number for the school, you said you use the term in total, so is that all school sites or is that individual school sites?
It's the total of Truckee Unified, so it's all the schools.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Any other questions on that? I know that's a new slide there. If not, my last slide. It is, good deal. So just looking forward, looking for that final feedback, as we mentioned, looking for gaining that direction on moving forward, putting the final rates in the Prop 218. We'll finalize that technical analysis. The report is essentially ready to go. I've gone through our internal process to have that reviewed. Once we have the final numbers, we're dropping the numbers in and we'll have that draft report ready. So that's something we'll, at least in staff level, we'll send around and have that reviewed prior. That'll be something that will be ready for you all in the March 15th board packet, I assume. That'll be ready as part of that. So you'll have that to look at. If you can't sleep one night, pull out that, you'll be out quick. It won't be too long. It actually isn't too bad. And then we'll have that final presentation on the 15th, and given board direction and final approval, then we would move, as Crystal mentioned, into that Prop 218 process and have that final public hearing on May 17th. So with that, I'll turn it over to the board for any questions, comments, thoughts, etc.
Thanks. Questions or comments from the board?
Yeah, just as an aside for us, I had a meeting yesterday with my Alpine's board and a few committee members. There's probably 15 of us all there, and I just brought up these rate increases and stuff, and I got no pushback at all. Even a couple of them said, "Oh yeah, that $70 jump on the third option, that's okay." Different bunch of people, but Alpine Meadows types.
Any restaurant owners in there?
But I was kind of like put it out there to see what kind of pushback, and there was none.
Okay.
So kind of got the feeling people are expecting a raise and everything else went up, so why not us?
Other questions or comments?
I would just like to thank Sean, the work that you and the team have put together for this, particularly putting in the alternative too. I think that gave us a little bit of a more clarity as far as what that would look like with the tapering off. I really appreciate that.
Okay. Dale?
Yes, I got a question. That on slide, I believe it's number 8. We were talking about inflation, and it says fiscal year 24 and 25, you're figuring 10% plus 3.8%. Can you explain a little bit more, Sean, on what the inflation rate on the overall study is? We're looking out there to 2039 or so. It seems to me last month you said that we were basing our inflation on 3.6. If I remember right, I had it written down. And it seems to me that our yearly inflation is more like 9.6. And given the fact that our inflation is high, a little bit higher than what your study indicates, might these figures be a little bit soft?
So good question. So what we did, there's a couple different inflation factors. So the ones on slide 8 are specific to just the capital side. So when we looked at the project cost in 2020, 2021 dollars, then we wanted to increase those based on what we've been seeing the last year or so and account for what's coming into this year. So that's where we added the 10% to those first 2 years. And then in the out years, we were 3.8. On the O&M expenses, on average, we were running about 3.6% in the out years. So on that side, to your point, I think Dale was, are we maybe a little low on the O&M? Possibly. We've got some updated costs in 23 budget and some adjustments in 24, so we're trying to capture those, but then it is just inflation in the out years. Did that help?
That helps a little bit, but when we look at what's happened over the last few years as far as for inflation, and it makes me a little bit nervous, Sean, that when we look out another 3 or 4 years, that inflation still may be on the rise, and if it is on the rise, these figures that we've been looking at and that you're presenting, it seems to me that they might be, like I say, a little bit on the soft side, and it seems to me also that it's a very hard figure to put to really carve into stone, so to speak, over a 30-year or a 20-year plan. And when you look out to 2039, who knows what the inflation rate will be? And I'm just a little bit concerned that what we're looking at here may be a little bit soft due to inflation and wages and what we've been dealing with over the last, let's say, 3 or 4 years.
Well, we're only looking at 5 years.
It's
Correct.
a 5-year rate plan.
Yeah. We can look at it again in 5 years.
Correct, and I think Director Cox, to your point, I think one of the, maybe we weren't conservative enough is I think maybe what you're saying here in the short term where we could increase our inflation assumptions. We did increase fiscal year 24 inflation assumptions in our model. You have to dig into the detail to kind of find that, but 24 was up a bit more. As an example, we had 10% on some of our utilities and chemical increases to try and account for those. And so that is an option for the board. We have to justify this and document it, I'll say. Maybe justify was kind of a harder word than I needed, but we have to document what those assumptions are because in the Prop 218 process where the board would adopt the maximum rates in that time period. So we could bump those up, those inflation assumptions up, and then if those weren't realized, as you get out into 25, 26, the board could adopt something less than what was noted. Again, that gets a little tricky, making sure we've got all our I's dotted and T's crossed as we go. But I understand your point as well, that we maybe have been too conservative on our assumptions.
Yes, thank you. That was my main concern about where we're headed here, and are we going to review these 3 alternatives again next month?
Hopefully not. Our goal is to get some feedback from the board today on which alternative you would like us to move forward with, and then next month we'd be back with that final analysis, documentation, and Proposition 218 customer notice.
Okay, with that being said, maybe we should discuss a little bit more in detail, if the rest of the directors don't mind, what our end goal is here. And it seems to me that if it was me and I was doing this for my personal self, I would want to bolster our capital reserves as much as possible, as soon as possible, given the fact that our plant is 50 years old and we are going to be addressing, according to the Carrillo report, some certain known repairs and upgrades. And if we have an unexpected not so much a catastrophe, but an unexpected repair, such as the boilers, which is going to be a significant amount of money. I would want to see as healthy of capital reserves as we can put together in the shortest amount of time. And I know what the draft showed, and Sean, you've done an excellent job putting together a forecast of what financially it's going to mean to our customers. But I'll tell you what, not raising our rates for 10 years is really costing this agency dearly. And once again, if it was me personally, I would want to see as healthy of capital reserves and fund balances as we could get in the shortest amount of time, which would mean alternative 3. And with that being said, that would undoubtedly raise some outcry within our customer base. And it makes me a little nervous to think that, but by the same token, pull the Band-Aid off and hope you don't remove the scab.
Okay, so you're advocating for alternative 3 as being the rate, I guess the rate transition program that you would be supportive of, Dale?
Say again?
Sounds like your preference would be for us to implement alternative 3.
Well, like I say, this is the way I would approach it in my personal life, because it's I'm very conservative as far as doing an outlook on what we're going to need to do within our agency to keep a 50-year-old plant. By the time we get out there 30 more years or 20 more years, we're going to be looking at a plant that's 60, 70 years old. And in that time frame, there's going to be some unexpected repairs and updates. Now, we are talking about the UV, and some of these things that are significant cost upgrades. And if we marginalize our increase in our capital reserves, we're going to be hard pressed to make these kind of decisions when the time comes. And I want to see us make and bring together the most money we can in our capital reserves in the shortest amount of time, given the fact that our plant's 50 years old.
Okay, thanks, Dale. Other questions or comments from board members?
I think it's really good that we've gone through this process. We clearly need to raise rates. The question is how much? Sean is, there's a lot of assumptions that go into this. What are the costs going up that we're going to be subject to? Are we going to do all these capital projects? Are there going to be other unknown capital projects? It's a challenge, and it's a lot of crystal ball work, but I think we've done a pretty good job of trying to make what I think is a relatively conservative best guess of what those costs are going to be. And, all 3 alternatives, I think, put us on the right track. They get us to the point where we're able to operate and make these capital improvements that we've identified as needing to be done. We have to do some borrowing to get there, and actually start to build up some reserves. We're not only paying for our costs, operating and capital costs, are starting to get our reserves built. I'm sensitive to, I understand Dale's desire to, push forward that financially that looks best for us, but you know, the likelihood of that resulting in a 50% protest that shuts down any increase may be unlikely, but we need to be sensitive to our customers at the same time. I sort of like alternative 2. I think that that's digestible by the public. I think it gets us on the right path. If Sean's and staff and the board's assumptions are wrong and costs are greater than we expect, and it looks like I think we're still going to be able to cover our capital costs and our operating costs. We're just not going to build our reserves up as quickly. We're not going to be looking at a 3.5% increase in years 6 through 10. We may have to do more than that to make that correction, but I think we're on a path to get the agency on much more sound financial standing, and so I guess I'm interested in. I don't know that we're making the motion yet, but I'm leaning towards alternative 2 and moving forward with that. I think that again, if the assumptions are bad, are off by somewhat, we're going to have a shot in 5 years to go back. Maybe we need to borrow more money if we determine quickly that interest rates go up quite a bit over the next 2 years. We may need to borrow more than the $28 million assumption, but we have tools to do this. I think, right?
So what you're saying, Blake, is in alternative 2, if I'm reading this, we're looking at a 30% increase in 2024, and then we're looking at 2 more years of increases, one of 18.5 and another at 13.5, and we're slowly going to ratchet it down to 3.5% rate increase. And the thing that concerns me a little bit, Blake, with this alternative is that we raise the rates immediately 30%. The following year, we raise them another 20%. And the following year after that, we're going to raise them another, let's say, 15% for practical purposes. And those rate increases year after year after year, to me, causes a little bit of concern. I would personally rather see a rate increase that's significant. We know that we're behind the 8 ball here, and I think that yes, the 70% increase in alternative 3 is significant, but the following years, for the next decade, the rate increases are going to be minimal. And it's choose your poison, so to speak. I just think that when you sit back and you raise rates year after year significantly, it causes some outcry, some little bit of protest maybe within the member districts about whether or not we're doing the right thing. But we're behind the 8 ball here. And I feel the sooner that we get our reserves up to where they need to be for us to operate our organization efficiently and effectively, there's going to have to be a little bit of pain. And how we inflict that pain is the decision that we have before us now. And that's we all look at things a little bit differently. I'm just looking at it at what we're looking at the end, what we're looking at out here at 2033, and how we're going to get there. And for the next 3 years, if we're going to be raising rates 15 to 18%, that's significant. And Once again, I hate to repeat myself, but getting our capital reserves to a point where we can function without raising the rate significantly year after year after year, I personally think that it would be, in my world, a preferable way to go. But I'm willing to sit back and compromise on whatever you guys want to do. It's just, this deal where we didn't raise rates for 10 years was a big mistake on our part as a board. Now, all of you guys weren't there over the last 10 years, but I was. And, for a director to come into the agency and before their member districts saying that my main mission is to keep the rates down, we're paying for it now. We're paying for it because we got a plant that's 50 years old, and we're going to have some significant repairs and maintenance and upgrades. And if we don't have the money, we got to borrow. Now, I want to close with one more question to Sean. You've done a great job putting together and understanding the position of our agency, and I know this may be unfair, but if you were in our position, Sean, what would be your personal pick on these three alternatives?
Hey, Dale, before we have Sean answer that question, I'd like to hear from the other board members. That might influence his answer.
I believe alternative 2 works for me. I just take a look at the dollar increases each month, and when you get to year 4, all of a sudden alternative 2 becomes the one where you're making a little bit more money. I mean, I certainly understand what Dale's saying. The 11-year abyss created a lot of issues, and I think we have to be very cognizant of the fact that if you throw a number out of 70% to most people, that's a number that...
I was thinking about the businesses too.
Right.
Big one.
Yeah, and so each of these alternatives gets us to roughly the same end point in 5 years, which is rates that are approximately $600 per year per EDU. And actually, when I just look at 3 years out, it's almost the same point then.
Yeah.
Alternative 1 is $536, alternative 2 is $535, alternative 3 is $557. They're all pretty close. So in my opinion, it's just a question of how rapidly or gradually that transition happens over what's really that first 3 years. I think spreading that transition out rather than doing it all at once in year 1, I think spreading it out over the 2 to 3 years and getting to the same endpoint is probably better, has a lower likelihood of significant customer objection. So, you want to answer Dale's question now?
What's Dave Smeltzer think?
I'm in favor of 2.
So
Now back to your answer.
all right. So I think I would be. I'm leery. I probably have battle scars here from public hearings. I agree with you all. From your perspective, alternative 3 is the way to go financially, right? That sets you up for the long term the best. The impact to customers is fairly significant on some of them. When you think of, on our chart where we had the left-hand graph with those, that was at the 30%, and there's some fairly significant impacts to customers. I like to try and minimize that as much as we can. So I would probably land, if I got to tell you what to do, I would probably be closer to alternative 2 than alternative 3. But I may push up a little bit on that front year a little bit. I'd probably keep it less than 35% and let the out years fall out. as best I could. So I think alternative two, when I was working with Crystal when we were putting this together after we met with you all last week, and then when we talked with the finance committee last week, then we kind of put this together, and I kind of had a couple different versions of it. They all kind of came back to right around alternative two. It's just how much do you push up in the beginning? I think you can probably go up a little more in the beginning. It's just how do you do the middle 3 years, right? Do you drop that? You got to keep that second one up a little bit. If we only go up to 35% as an example, you've got to keep that second year, the 15-ish%, somewhere in their range, and then you can drop off. So I don't think that's far off, Dale, from probably where I would land. To your point on the, inflation impact, that may be something you could bump up as we look at these. There could be a little bump into the, 30, 18, 13, 8. You could bump those up a touch, a percent or something like that, and that would probably cover some of that. You've also got the financing piece that's going to be going on. Once you get there, that may end up with different numbers. So while it's not ideal, if something did go bump and you didn't get to where you wanted to be, you can redo the 218 process. Even the week after you do your first one, you could go through another process to establish it. Not ideal, I know, but I'm saying that the board can do that if we have something happen that would supersede what you're adopting here.
So, let me ask a logistics question, Andrew. You might be able to shed some light on that. So we're going through a 218 process. There's a notification to get the ball going. We adopt them in year one, and whatever alternative we choose. But we have rate increases in years 2, 3, 4, and 5. There's no longer a protest vote at that point, but what kind of communication is required to notify our customers that there's a 20% increase in year 2, or even a 3.5 if we went with alternative 3?
Right. So after the public hearing, and let's say the protest in this round, in this first year, does not succeed. There is no protest against the rates. There's no legal obligation under Prop 218 to notify the customers again. It's really a board and agency decision in communicating with your customers in years 2 through 5 about those rate increases. The other thing I'd note is, again, you're setting the maximum legal rates for the next 5 years. So the board would have the option, of course, in each year to review the rates and set something less than what you've noticed through Prop 218, but not more. So you can have that conversation in years 2 through 5 and communicate out to the customers.
But there's no actual requirement. I know that customers don't have the ability to protest, but there's not even a notification process. In alternative 2, we're looking at roughly a 20% increase. I would assume that we want to inform folks, but it's not a legal requirement to notify them. They just might see on their property tax, or if they're direct bill, that increase come the beginning of the next fiscal year.
You've described that correctly.
Okay, so I've heard Dale advocating for alternative 3. I think I've heard the balance of the board suggesting alternative 2 with a slightly slower percentage, or slightly lower percentage rate increase in the first couple of years, but spread out as being preferable. I think what staff and Sean need from us, if we're going to meet the timeline we're trying to achieve, is direction today from the board on which alternative we want to pursue, so then they can finalize the studies and the notification process, so that at our March meeting we can take action and then get this done in time for our next fiscal year. So
just to Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes.
Just to be clear, Sean, you made a comment that alternative 1, and like I say, I can compromise, and not that my half vote makes any difference, but I see that grin there. Yeah, it's okay. I can count to 3 too, as well, I should say. But if in fact we want to step up that percent on our second year, 1 or 2%, Is that feasible, or do we have to carve this all into stone with our Proposition 218 notice that goes out?
Yes, so we would, so what we would put together based on the feedback today is we would put that Prop 218 process or public notification letter together. That would have the actual rate. So we would want to have that in there. Plus, we'd want the supporting documentation, my report, to have those same numbers and tie out. So ideally, we would have that finals. But to your point, I think, Dale, and as was mentioned, these are the maximum rates. So if we want to adjust those, years 2, 3, and 4 a little bit, we could do that. I would go back and adjust my inflationary factors in the model to reflect those impacts so that we would, meet our expenses, equal our revenues as part of that, to reflect that kind of approach as part of that.
But when you say we can adjust them, we couldn't adjust them above. We can
Correct.
only adjust them downward.
Correct. You're setting the maximum.
Right.
Okay, no further questions.
Okay. So I think what staff is looking for is direction from the board so that ideally when we come back, when this item comes back in front of us in March, we've got the final numbers and we as a board are able to approve the rate alternative that is recommended to then move into the Prop 218 process. So my sense is that we've got a concurrence on a majority of the board to go with alternative 2. I guess the question is, would staff like a formal action from the board, or is the discussion and kind of overall sentiment that you've heard from the board adequate?
I don't think we need a formal direction or a vote. What I'm hearing is option 2, and then we can provide that to Sean. He can finalize a report with option 2, and then we can bring that next month.
Okay. Any parting thoughts or comments on that, Dale?
No comments from me.
Okay. Dave?
And this is option 2 with a little bit of bump up for inflation, is that correct?
Well, I could do that. I mean, it's a new scenario I haven't seen, but that would address what Director Cox was talking about.
Yeah, this inflation is a real wide topic, gentlemen, and I would just hate to see it come back and haunt us in the long run.
So if we did do that, we could, without another 218 process, we could reduce it back. I'm trying to cover the inflation, cover our ass for the inflation, but we could always bring it back down, the rate.
Yeah. What are the assumptions again as it relates to?
So on the O&M side, we're running on average over the 10-year period at about 3.6%. Early on, we're 4%, so 24 was 4%. 25 was, I just did the math, 3.7, 3.8%. And as we get out to that year, we're running at about 3.5%. So that average is about 3.6 over the 10 years. After, so for 24, 25, and so on.
Right.
So if we did bump those up a little bit, that would impact those, the 18.5, the 13.5, and the 8.5 a little bit.
Right. Yeah, inflation's a tough one. I mean, the last year and a half or 2 years, it's been significantly higher than it was for the 10 years prior to that. So, it's a bit of a guessing game in terms of, what to expect going forward. And, I don't know. I'm satisfied with the estimates that we've got based on the historical data that we've looked at. And I don't. The other thing I don't know is if we assume, let's say we assume it instead of 3% increase in O&M or 3.5% increase in O&M, 6.5% increase in O&M. I don't know what that does to the rates, because the percentage increase in O&M, it's not going to be the same percentage increase in rates, and I don't know if it's going to magnify it or if it's going to minimize it.
If inflation were up, it would have a bit of an impact, but it's not going to go from 18 to 25, or it's not going to be that significant. But if we bump up by 1%, it's going to bump up probably about 0.5% to the rate. O&M goes up 1%, we're probably going to bump up that rate adjustment 0.5% or somewhere in that range. So it's in play, but it's not significant.
Yeah, I just feel like we're within spitting distance here, and
Yeah, there's a lot of, like I said, we're all playing with the crystal ball. It's looking like, fiscal year '24. We may see, CPIs and, COLAs that increase what are used in the budget. And again, what that's going to result in, I think, is everything else being the same, and that's different. We may have less reserve buildup at the ending, but I think we still meet our objectives, our immediate objectives, which is having sufficient funds to do our capital project and do our operations. And but there's a lot of other things at play here. I mean, in a 5-year period, I think we're,
And the fact of the matter is, at year 5, we would need to go through another Prop 218 process to even just continue with inflationary
Right.
adjustments at that point. So that creates an opportunity to do a course correction in one direction or the other based on the real-time information that will have available to us at that point. So I'm satisfied with the assumptions as they currently sit.
Okay, again, back to, we could, any one of these years, charge less.
correct.
But having bumped up the inflation factor a little bit, we would have that cushion for ourselves. And that's what I was suggesting.
The inflation factor doesn't, we're not trying to hit a certain target so that if costs go up, rates go up. We've really, we really kind of have set a somewhat arbitrary objective of roughly doubling our rates, and so what we're talking about is saying, let's do more than doubling, and hopefully that'll get us to have additional reserves. So, I don't know, it really depends on what's driving the, Sean's model, which seems to be kind of like we've decided we're going to roughly double rates over the next couple of years. And if inflation goes up, what that would do would drive it down. So saying, adding an inflation factor, we really got to say, what do we want to do with rates? And again, the doubling, I think, gets us on the right path. And we could do more than that and be in ideally better financial shape and have less out-year increases, but then we got the impact to all of our customers that we're looking at. And so, and we're only talking about 1% or something like that. We want to, I think we've got a solid number in alternative to. What we want to do is in March have as part of the board packet the rate study that we're going to accept that's going to go on the website. So when the 218 notice goes out, customers who may have concerns can go find that. And if Sean is still playing with variables and coming back in March with something new that we haven't seen, and then we're talking about it, we're putting staff and Sean in a crunch to get that all packaged and put together. I'd like to know and accept the report so that we know what's going to be available to the public in March. And again, tweaking it a percentage point or two in the rates to go to 33 and then 20, it moves the needle a little bit, but I don't know that it really moves it all that much.
Good.
Okay.
Any further discussion or comments?
So to get clarified, so are you saying the numbers that are here now you are comfortable with?
I'd say the direction we're giving, because the board item wasn't really agendized for actual action, so the general direction is to direct staff and Sean to work together to put a final rate study report using alternative 2 that we brought to us for actual acceptance of the report and those numbers for adoption for the 218 process.
For the March.
That's the direction that I think,
Okay.
again,
Yeah, I'm supportive of that.
Yeah.
Are you okay with that, Dave?
Yeah.
You are.
Uh,
Dale, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm happy, you know, I like the caveat in there that Sean was recommending that, after the second year, that if we wanted to bump it up a little bit more, maybe we could, but, I'm happy, you know, it's not my preference, of course, but, I'm looking at being in the compromised position with my half vote.
Okay. I think that concludes this item. Staff and Sean, do you feel like you have adequate
Yes.
direction to take this forward and bring it back to us in March?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Sean.
Hey, Sean?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. You're doing a great job, and you're very thorough, and it's very comprehensive. If I can understand it, that goes light years. I'm not really a financial guru like my buddy Blake over there.
Thank you. It's much appreciated.
You're doing a great job, and I really appreciate what you've done for us.
Thank you.
Okay, item 7, related topic. It's discussion of Prop 218 draft notice to property owners.
Yep, so Crystal's going to present. This is a very rough draft. That's why I have a printed copy as well as we can email it out. But looking for input, and Crystal's going to review it and go over it. So I'll turn it over to Crystal.
Okay, I'm just gonna read it. Just kind of get it on public record and read it. This is a draft. So what will happen is once we accept all this and once you guys accept all this in March, we will have this ready to send to our agency that does our sending out to the customers. We're already doing. Celeste has put in a lot of work getting the behind the scenes stuff ready to go for that to happen as soon as possible after you guys accept the rates in March.
So I just want to clarify. You're intending to read this all out loud?
Unless nobody wants me to.
Yeah, I don't know that that's particularly helpful.
That's fine too.
Just put it in a record.
Yeah, so if the goal is to, I guess, create more, public exposure to the draft 218 notice?
And to bring it to you guys too, because we did not have it in the packet.
Understood. So this would need to be finalized at our March meeting, correct?
Correct.
That's correct.
The intent was to get it in front of you guys so you could provide any input on
Right.
how it's drafted. If there's
So-
something you particularly wanted it to say or not say.
So what I would suggest, and help me if this doesn't work, Andrew, would be that the board members basically take this, have an opportunity to review it. If there's any comments or suggestions that board members have, they could relay those to Richard, and then Richard could take that information and use that input to fine tune this and bring a final a proposed final version of it back to us at the March meeting. That doesn't create Brown Act challenges to work that way. I think that might be more effective than kind of reading it aloud right now.
That works for me.
Okay.
Can we get an electronic version,
Yes.
please?
On the second page of the handout where you have the table,
Yes.
are those real numbers or where did these numbers come from?
Maximum.
Those are alternative two numbers.
The top line there, residential present rate 1153, looks like the barber shop rate is down at the bottom of the commercial rate. There's a residential and it's 2550.
Yep, you're right.
Yeah, we'll get that corrected.
Yeah,
So make sure the numbers are right.
and another question, since
That's a good comment. Yeah.
Since we have two rates, one for those customers that we receive property taxes from, and one from those customers that we don't receive property taxes from, and the ones that don't receive property taxes have a slightly higher rate. I think it's about 10% of our customers we don't receive property taxes from, and we charge more. Would the letter go out with sort of both rate structures, or would we just send, kind of slightly tweak it, and then the people who are in that second rate, say the non-tax that have the higher rate, would they just receive a slightly different one with just their actual rates for those customers?
My preference is both tables on there, but I would defer to Richard.
Yeah, that's fine. I think trying to send out two different ones might
Okay.
be the challenge, so we can just make sure that both tables,
Okay.
both the tax and non-tax rates are on it.
I would venture to guess that the people receiving this are going to have no idea which table applies to them. You know what I mean? And I wouldn't know if a portion of my property tax goes to TTSA or not. So, I think that's kind of deep in the bowels of the county assessor's office and LAFCO actions from years gone by, and I don't even know. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I know it's. I mean, unless they look at their bill and can compare it to see where they're at. I know I had talked to Richard about identifying those parcels and what criteria we use to determine who we charge which rate for. And so, as you kind of flesh that out, it may be very simple. It might be everybody in El Dorado County is that group, or it might be spread out by the hundreds of TRAs, tax areas that we serve, and they could be little islands and checkerboard stuff like that. So I don't exactly know. I think it will be a challenge for folks, and maybe that's falls on their burden. I don't know whether there needs to be. I mean, if there's a nice clean map that can be accompanied with it to show what areas are subject to Table A versus A1 versus A2.
So I think it's probably simpler for us to send out a single communication or notice with two tables on it. It's probably more understandable for our customers if we're able to send the customers that are going to, if it's the customers that are in our tax area get a notice, and then the customers that are not in our tax area get the other notice. That would be the most understandable from the person receiving it. What I don't know is how. I mean, we got however many thousand, 25,000 customers, and I don't know how easy or difficult it would be for us to accomplish that.
Can we send two different letters, though?
Yeah, actually, that was a point, President Wilkins. I think there may be some legal issues with sending out multiple notices.
Okay.
You'd have to go back and check, but splitting the process, you may end up with multiple Prop 218 processes.
Okay.
Multiple notices, and there could be some impacts beyond that. So I think a single notice is probably the right way to go, but the consultant may need to talk to staff to make sure that we have accurately identified for the customer which rate they would be subject to, because I think that's going to be important for Prop 218 compliance. So we may need to just do some further work to confirm that.
Okay.
And we're researching how the areas that are taxed, how the counties are doing that. So we're still waiting for some information to come back. So one option is we can point, if we do one table for clarity, we can always point them to the website, or figure out how to point them in this letter so you know whether they're taxed or not.
Let me ask a question. Do we currently have differential rates for people that we receive property tax from versus ones that we don't?
Yes.
Okay. So this would be a continuation of that practice. So someone knows, because you're getting either rate A or rate B.
Correct.
And it's the data's there.
And it's currently in Casella, and correct me if I'm wrong, Celeste, but we do know who is in the tax rate area and who is not. But it is the counties that determine what the tax rate areas are.
Right. So I don't know if it's possible in the notice to have a single notice that has the two rate structures, whether you're in the tax rate area and or not. But then to have, I don't know if it's possible to have customized language that informs each recipient which one they're in, or that may not work logistically. But I think you probably get the flavor of what we were talking about, which is the more we can help customers understand which tax rate area they're in when they receive this notice, probably the better.
Okay.
Well, especially if you're in one that's higher than the other, and you're looking at something, well, how come these guys are paying less? That creates kind of a...
And I could also see if you get two notices, it's like, well, what are they?
Yeah.
What's going on? Which one am I in? Which one applies? It has the potential of creating some confusion.
Yeah.
Or two tables.
I'm going to throw a real curveball at it, which is, this concept of differential rates.
Right.
The basis for that, and does this make sense since we're looking at roughly a 30% increase? They're both going up no matter what. Going to a single rate for all customers, and you can't really say in percentages because they're going to be different percentages. So if we stay away from this percentage part of it, we just say the rates are going to this amount for all customers. We just can't use percentages because it'd be different depending which rate you were coming from.
Right.
I don't know, and then in the notice, you have to show what your present rate is, because then you're going to have to show two rates all consolidating to one, or can you just say these are the rates that are going to be for 24 through 28, and not talk about the current rate, not talk about percentages, because that gets muddy, and just say these are the rates going forward. And
I think we're going to have to tease out some of these issues by looking at the notice.
Right, but I think what Blake is suggesting, which is a legitimate question to the board, it sounds like about 90% of our customers we also receive property tax from. The amount of property tax we receive could be variable based on tax rate area, county, et cetera. So I think Blake's onto a valid point. It's if we want to get really precise, we could feasibly have 15 different rates, that are intended to compensate for how much property tax we're getting, from any individual customer, and that becomes impractical. Maybe just simplifying, adopting a rate structure that applies to all customers regardless of how much property tax we receive from each customer. Probably simplifies things administratively. It probably simplifies the Prop 218 process, and it probably doesn't cause us to leave that much revenue on the table, because I think if it's only 10% of our customers, it would be subject to the higher rate, and then the higher rate's really not that much higher. This may just be more administrative effort than it's worth. I don't know. Is that what you're suggesting, Blake?
I was just throwing, like I said, it's a curveball. I know it's, from Sean's report to our 218, notification. It in the long term, it would make things simpler, but there's the additional complication of, this process right now. And so I guess maybe we can amend, our direction is to take that into consideration, and if you guys find that there's a viable solution, to get a study that basically achieves the alternative two objectives in terms of a revenue stream by consolidating to a single rate for all customers, and you don't see any red flags, I'd say run with it. If red flags come up, then we're expecting to see two rates that come back. Yeah, so not holding your feet to make you do it, because it may be untenable time-wise or Prop 218 wise. It may have some things that just aren't.
We'll do research and I'll report back to the board.
Okay.
And then as far as we'll kind of I'm thinking we'll parallel approach it, research that, and then as far as the Prop 218 letter, 2 rate tables, but figure out a way to point the customers to either find out if they're in a tax zone and what tax zone, or include a map or something of that
Yeah.
nature.
Right, and just to clarify, probably with Sean, all of the presentation data was based on the rates that would apply to customers who we do receive property tax from.
Correct.
So there's other data in there that has higher rates for customers we don't receive property tax from.
Correct.
Okay.
I know we're going to provide feedback independently to Richard regarding the document, but just in my quick scan of it, and I just want to get the rest of the board's feedback. I think this is an opportunity to do a little kind of, people don't, I think we're so out of sight, out of mind. I would like to see, us take the opportunity in this mailer to everybody to have some, what is TTSA? We're the agency responsible we've been around since 1977. We're the agency responsible for the treatment and collection of wastewater. A little bit of a, context of who the agency is in the thing, as opposed to just jumping into Prop 218. And I know in the second kind of highlighted section, there is some mention of, are committed to maintaining its wastewater reclamation stuff, but maybe give them that context of who the agency is at the beginning. So it's an opportunity for us to educate folks, the value of what our mission is and that importance and where we're located and where we're, just
Who we are, what we do.
Yeah. So, so just expect that, but I want to make sure if you guys are good with that, because that's a whole, that's not just nitpicky little text, that's
I think that's a good
an
suggestion.
additional item to include in there.
Okay.
Dale, comments?
No comment.
Okay. Other comments from other board members? Yeah, and I'll just layer on to Blake's comments that if we can collectively be comfortable with just going to a single rate structure, it seems like that probably simplifies a number of different things, probably now and in the future. So I would not be opposed to that. Okay. So does staff feel like you've received adequate direction for the moment on this? And then if board members have other thoughts or suggestions on the Prop 218 notice, feel free to contact Richard with those prior to the next board meeting.
And I'll email out a digital copy to each board of director, and then you just respond.
I have one comment about the aging infrastructure. I would put a date on it, say it's 50 years old or something.
Okay.
And then at our March meeting, what I'm assuming staff would be requesting is that the board formally approve the Prop 218 notice that would be in its final form at that meeting.
Yeah, and my hope is that I can communicate with each of you and get it to that final version, so when you bring it in March, it'll be
We're not wordsmithing it. Okay. Great. Okay, next on our agenda is review and discussion of agency-owned property for current and future use.
So staff received direction from the board to create a map of our parcels and overlay those with some of the important information. Jay did a great job of putting together the map with several overlays. So I'm going to turn it over to Jay. He's probably got the most experience on the property we own, I think, out of everybody. So he'll give the presentation and the board can discuss the future use of it.
Morning, directors. So yeah, as Richard mentioned, I was tapped because I have a lot of history, Michael as well, in terms of what competing land uses we have, current, future, and even past in some cases. So first, we own 937 acres in Marks Valley. When you add up the numbers on this first sheet, you'll add up to 932. And I believe the difference is that there's the land underneath the 267 bypass bridge which was sold to Caltrans. So if you're looking at the numbers, you'll see that slight discrepancy there. So I was just going to step through each one of these slides. They all have a little bit different content to them. This first one, and then so it's like 10 slides about, and then at the end we're going to put all of them together, and then that'll present a good picture for you to kind of discuss at that point. So I'm here to pretty much give you guys the info, and then, but I'm going to let directors discuss in terms of what path forward would be. I'm available for any questions at that point. But so this first slide is land ownership, and what you'll see is blue is TTSA land, and green is TSD land, and the purplish, orangish, that is airport, yellow is Tykert. There's some other colors in there that are hard to see, like the red, which I believe is state of California, and Forest Service up in the upper right-hand corner. That gives you a kind of an overall impression that, by and large, in Martins Valley, we own quite a bit of property. Next slide, please. So this next slide is focusing on reclaimed property. So you'll notice a layer has been turned on in that upper right corner of the blue area, and that's the northern part of the Tykert pit. There's two areas of partial release property and then an extension area. The extension area is just being completed in reclamation and is starting in its monitoring cycle. So that's land that can potentially be used in the future by us or by others, once it's reclaimed. Next slide, please. So some more layers just turned on. If you focus on the Tykert area on the far right, there's a dashed purple area. These are our leases, by the way. There's an exclusive mineral lease where that dashed purple line is, where mining activity has been taking place. The mining activity has stopped, and we're just currently under reclamation in that area.
That's the 41 acres, Jay?
That's the 41 acres. Yeah. And then to the right of that darker purple area, that is the lease that Tykert has for quiet use and enjoyment for 2050 until 2053. And quiet use and enjoyment is in the lease, but I kind of like that term.
What does it mean?
Quiet use and enjoyment of an aggregate mining operation.
Exactly. Yeah. Pretty much it means that they have the ability to use the land without interference from us. We get to monitor and make sure that they are upholding the terms of their lease, but that pretty much that they have that land, and we can't say we want part of that for a pond.
Hey Jay, and if I'm not mistaken, the history there is that Tykert used to own that land, and then we did an agreement with them a number of years ago where we allowed them to give them mining rights on property that we owned at the time in exchange for them giving us long-term ownership of the land that they owned. Is that what happened?
In general, yeah. There were three operating agreements. There was a grant, there was a lease agreement, and an exclusive mineral lease agreement, and those three wrapped up all together a transfer that took place. In general, yes. They have the ability to mine that purple dashed area. In exchange, we would own the property to the right of that, the dark purple area. And
Okay.
we would lease it back to them.
Okay.
And then we would earn royalties on whatever they mine.
Got it.
Did we ever have we always owned that property just to the north of the purple parcel?
No, that was also Tykert land.
So that was part of the deal also, is when
That's
we
right.
gave the mining rights to that 41 acres, they transferred the
Yeah, so it's that
ownership to us.
long, skinny. So you see the yellow area, the two blobs to the left of that extend the same length with the yellow area. That was all originally Tykert owned. And as part of that agreement, that was now granted, I believe, so or granted to TTSA as land given to us, and then in exchange we have these other agreements in place.
And the squiggly line represents, between the yellow and the other ones, represents Martis Creek.
Martis Creek, and yellow, Tykert still owns the yellow, and what that is that shaly hill to the east of the creek.
And you said that they're done mining the 41 acres?
They're done mining it. They're having trouble reclaiming the southernmost part of that. So where that red text is, it says RC 81 acres.
Okay.
Like in that corner there, they're having trouble getting their regrowth success. You know, on grasses, trees, shrubs, etc. So part of the agreement is that one of the terms is that they can bring an import into that area to increase the success of reclamation. So while they're not actively mining, they are actively reclaiming that area. The other lease that I want to point out on this is in that far left bottom, the dashed pink. That's the bus barn lease, and that's a 40-year lease that expires in the year 2041. Not mistaken, 732, somewhere in there. Any questions on the leases? Other questions on leases? Okay, next, airport land transfers is the next slide. And I know this is a closed session topic, so I actually myself don't know much about it, but you guys obviously do. It's the 3 parcels that have been under discussion are those dashed parcels, or I should say crosshatch maybe, parcels at the bottom. The blue one, the brown one, and the pink one.
Yeah, so with that, we actually have a agreement that was approved in open session with the airport that outlines the terms and conditions associated with that land exchange.
Okay.
And this is basically representing that.
So I defer. If there are any questions on that, are there any questions? Further questions on that? Okay.
So basically, what we see, the blue with the black lines through it, assuming that the contract with the airport goes through for the land exchange, that would become airport property, and then the area, kind of like the pinkish, orange, red, whatever it is, with the black lines through it, would become TTSA property.
Correct.
Okay.
And is it? Do you know the fate of the pink, the one that's furthest to the right?
It's an easement, isn't it?
Yeah, that would be a navigation easement, I believe, or maybe it's a no build easement.
It was an easement for access. In the original documents, it was an easement for access to a future solar field.
The pink with the lines through it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's also the area where the existing road passes through, just for reference.
Right.
The road that goes up there. Okay, moving on. So effluent disposal field. The current disposal field is the one that's in the upper right. It's that burgundy colored one with the blue dash around it. And the proposed future disposal field is that more salmon colored, slightly larger rectangle down adjacent to the airport. And then I've also turned on a layer, which is that giant purple blob that covers most of Martis Valley. And what that is the effluent disposal plume, the predicted plume from the new disposal field. The outermost extents that plume would influence underground.
That's basically groundwater flow.
Groundwater flow, yep, from our injection.
From the
of
injection
waste.
wells.
Yeah.
Jay, is that the future disposal field rectangle? Is that codified anywhere? Is that just or is that just kind of something that staff has sort of said that's where we put it? Obviously, I mean, potentially we could put, if our existing effluent SAT system needed to be wore out and we needed to put somewhere else, there are other options than just that location, isn't there? Or is
So
that
there are other options, but I do want to say it is codified in the sense that it's in our WDRs as a location for future disposal. And also in the environmental impact reports that were written, the project reports that were written for the expansion, they studied this location. Like, that's how we were able to pick off what this simulated plume is actually from those environmental studies. So if the agency was in the mindset that they wanted to look at different other alternative locations for disposal field, for example, that would all need to be looked at again. You know, what are the impacts? The impacts at this site have already been evaluated, but if you move it, for example, if you were to move this closer to the river, for example, because of a number of factors, A, being close to the river, B, maybe underlying geomorphology or whatever it is, you know, that the clay lenses could be in different spots and different soils. So you would need to study, you know, what the effects, kind of all the studies that we had been done, you'd want to repeat it, something similar.
So the future disposal field, I'm assuming nothing can be built over it going forward?
I'm not sure that's the case, but I kind of defer to Michael here. I don't think that we would want anything over the disposal field.
No, because I mean it's basically a buried leach field.
Okay.
And if you had to access it, if you had structure or anything about it that was permanent, we'd have to build around that. Or
Right. At the time, so if I'm not mistaken, there was a point in time where we were, I guess, more actively using or maybe more actively accounting for the treatment that was derived from the disposal field than we are now. This is probably a larger conversation or a more detailed conversation for another day, but it's kind of the likelihood of the need for a future disposal field, I think, that may have changed with over time and our treatment processes here. I don't know for certain.
So I'll speak very generally, and then Michael, maybe you can add something if I leave something out that you think is important. The fields actually were never originally intended for nitrogen removal.
Okay.
It was intended to basically be for effluent disposal and then final effluent polishing. And what it was found is that during operation we found, oh wow, we're actually through the well sampling and we're getting some great nitrogen removal out of it. And then that changed over time. We're no longer using that for treating for nitrogen removal. However, it's still a great effluent polisher. And so the fact that it's set back far from the river allows, right in its current location, about a mile worth of soil filtration, if you will, for effluent. And there may come a time either from a flow perspective, as our flows increase, or from if you want to call it a clogging perspective, that perhaps in the first reaches of the soil that the effluent sees, that if there's some kind of over time, over decades, a clogging of the soils, then you need to plop it down in some other location where there's better infiltration. There could be a reason to move the disposal field for that as well. Michael, is there anything you want to add on any of that?
I mean, I think you've covered it. As far as for future, if we did have an issue with our disposal system, our disposal fields now, we would have to make that evaluation. And we've already made the evaluation in years past that this would be an appropriate place for that if the need was there to either expand because of flow to the plant. If the 8 fields that we had now weren't sufficient, this would be where we would move to first to make that expansion. And it may not be the size of the other one, but maybe there's 4 fields that were put in service to help with treatment or to take our flows. The 25-year master plan did show that this should be sufficient for the 25 years, but as Jay said, if we lost a field out there or 2 fields and we couldn't rehab those fields for some reason, we would have to have a place to move if we continue to do subsurface disposal.
So this location, the one I'll call in the pink, that's the location that was identified at some point in the past. Looks like it was TTSA land that was furthest away from the river. As it was probably before we owned the Tiger property.
It was before we owned the Tiger property.
Right. And if I'm not mistaken, really what the disposal fields are, after the effluent gets treated here at the plant, that comes out of pipe at the backside of the plant, gets pumped to the effluent fields, and then it's a series of basically wells that go down into the ground.
They're basically giant leach fields. So
Okay.
there's laterals.
They're
so
lateral.
There's a pipeline and there's laterals.
Okay.
Right now, I think it's a total of 30 acres is
Okay.
what the size of it is, and that's 8 fields.
Okay.
And each field is, I can't remember how many laterals are in each field, but so you need quite a bit of space because of the length of the laterals that you have to spread that amount of flow out over so that it would
Right.
percolate through the ground so that so that effluent isn't coming back up to the surface. So you can't condense the size.
Understood.
too much,
Yeah, I
So-
think
so-
it's about 80,000 or 85,000 linear feet of this leach field.
So the likely reason that right now we put the water there, the water soaks in, it's not backing up in the pipe, everything's good. It sounds like the water meets waste discharge requirements before it ever gets there. And then we double checked that a mile downstream that it's still meeting waste discharge requirements.
Kind of, because we did consider that a treatment system at one point when we redid our WDR in 2002, because we did call that out as a SAT, soil aquifer treatment. Some of our effluent quality discharge requirements moved from the effluent line where it drops into the pipe to go out to the disposal fields down to well 31, which is the furthest most well from the disposal fields and the closest one to the river.
Right.
So some of those requirements moved to there.
Right.
When we go through with Lahontan and look at redoing our WDR, some of that may change because we aren't calling this a treatment system anymore, but we don't know what that's going to look like yet. So.
Right.
Can we take a break by any chance?
Sure.
Okay.
Yep. 4 minutes.
So we were on effluent disposal,
Yes.
and are there any more discussion points or questions?
I talked to Mike and got in the break and got a couple more pieces of information. So it sounds like the dark purple area, that's where we currently have effectively groundwater infiltration fields. I'm cautious about calling them leach fields because a leach field is typically something I associate with a kind of a residential sewage treatment system, which this isn't.
Right.
Our sewage is treated before it leaves the plant. What's leaving the plant is water that has low solid content that we are infiltrating into the ground. We're doing it through, basically, perforated pipe and drain rock around it that then creates the area for it to soak in. So it is the water leaching into the ground, it is, but it's not necessarily a sewage treatment function that's going on there. And then it sounds like the scenarios are if the water stops soaking into the ground there for some reason in the future, which is we don't necessarily have a reason to believe that would be the case. It sounds like it's soaking into the ground just fine and has been for the last 50 years. We haven't seen an indication that that will change, but you never know. Then the question is, what do you do at that point? Do you go build a whole different spot for the water to soak into the ground, or do you create more area in the direct periphery of this location, to get that to happen? Or, there's other things that could happen with our regulatory environment where this is even less important, which would be odd. If the regional board put us under an NPDES permit, which is what we would be under if we had a pipe that went straight to the river. There's talk that they might do that even though we don't have a pipe that goes to the river. Then that could change the need for the areas for the water to soak in. I think it's great that it does, because anytime you run water through soil, it just makes it that much cleaner. So we've got clean water leaving the plant. We're making it even cleaner by soaking it into the soil. So I think it's a good thing to continue. Reason I'm drilling in on this is I'm just trying to get an understanding of, the relative likelihood that pink area becomes a critical piece of land in order for the agency to continue to meet its mission.
Yeah, so I guess the way I've seen it is through the lens of, if you think about it in terms of our tenure here and our generation here, that is probably pretty unlikely to go to the bottom pink area. And who knows where the future wastewater treatment will be 100 years from now. Maybe we're going to all have some cool way of disposing our waste that doesn't go to a treatment plant. But let's say we are here in 100 years and our flows are that much greater, that there may be a need to expand into another area. And
right.
So I've seen this more as kind of a long-term facility. There was debate as to whether we were going to even include it in the 25-year master plan because of that it was maybe envisioned, to be much beyond that. But we wanted to make sure we had monies in there in case we did need it. So we did include it, that it's at the far end of the 25-year.
Right. But there's also other land.
There's other land. Yeah.
That we own.
Yeah.
That one happens to be furthest from the river, which intuitively it's like, you put it furthest from the river, but given the function it's serving, that may not be that critical either. Closer to the river might be okay.
Yeah.
Right.
We wouldn't know without studying it, but yeah, I don't want to sound like it's locked in. It's not. But if there would be steps that you would have to do, right, in order to contemplate other sites seriously. You'd have to seriously consider other sites. You'd have to study them and do the groundwater hydrology and that kind of stuff.
Okay. Sorry for belaboring that point.
The size of the field looks like that's a wholesale replacement. It doesn't look like that's an expansion of the existing to accommodate additional flows. It looks like a retirement of the other one.
Yeah, retirement of the other one, but Mike, I did draw it slightly bigger. I want to explain the reason.
Yeah, the reason when I envisioned a wholesale replacement, for reasons that the original 8 fields failed, and it was not just an expansion, it was a total replacement, we would want to be able to replace for the future that would be a bigger set of fields, more than likely to handle more flow. So I asked to set aside a little bit more acreage than what the original 8 fields were, and that was so it actually is a little bit bigger.
Okay.
It allows for about another 2 sets of because it's right about 4 acres per disposal field. So this allowed for two more disposal fields, so it'd actually be a total of 10.
I know that in residential systems, you typically have to identify your active leach field, and then you have to have a backup leach field, which you cannot develop on because it needs to be available in case you need a backup. There's no infrastructure here, and there's nothing currently that would, that sets that land apart and would prohibit activity on that in the permit? Is that dedicated, like as a backup leach field area that cannot be developed?
Other than the fact that it's mentioned in the WDR as a backup area, and that there has been a study on that area. Other than that, there's no infrastructure. I think in part of that area we do have some sampling wells, some upgrading and sampling wells, but that's the only infrastructure that's actually in those.
There's no current regulatory requirement to maintain that as passive open space?
Not that I know.
Okay.
This is completely off the wall, but this goes back, rumor that we had to do something with the water because of the fishing downriver. That they were putting the water in, it was too clean. And that's why they're running it through the ground. That's rumor. I don't know anything. But is that? No?
I've never heard that, no.
Well, I think
This is 50 years ago that I heard that stuff.
we're currently obligated to make sure that the water ends up back in the river, though, right?
We are.
The downstream water interests sued us
Yes.
a long time ago when we were contemplating not putting the water back in the river.
Well, we
They said,
actually
"No, it's-"
ran an above ground disposal system for a while, which we called Green Acres. It was about probably about 35 acres on each side of Butterfield Road coming in, and we did above ground disposal with just a pump and sprinklers. And when we went through that process, they asked us to basically, in part of the lawsuit, when we changed from the ion exchange for ammonia removal to BNR, during that process, I think one of the things was that we would stop all above ground because of the amount of evaporation that would happen with that. They were concerned with that water leaving and not going into the ground and ending up back in the Truckee River, and it would be, not a natural amount of evaporation. It'd be,
Right.
So we had to stop that process of the above ground.
So to a certain degree, we're obligated to make sure that the water ends up in the river one way or another.
as much as possible.
Okay. All right.
Any
Thanks for the
further
history.
discussion or questions on this?
Just
one?
that's an interesting. I mean, there is this kind of myth around there, and the people that were concerned about the water not getting in the river, is that the Reno water purveyors, or was that the Indian tribe that owns Pyramid Lake?
I believe it was Truckee River Operating Agreement, which was a consortium of a number of different downstream water users. I think it was a TROA. I wasn't here for
Okay.
it, but
I think it was a combination of all
Okay.
Pyramid Lake, the Indian tribe, and also water users downstream.
Okay.
That's correct. Researched the lawsuit.
Interesting.
Okay. Thanks, Jake.
yeah. Next slide, please. Emergency storage. So we have a number of storage ponds out there for, this is for raw sewage equalization or storage. The dark green are the ponds under the bypass bridge. So as you're going over the Truckee River, you look off both sides. You can see those large basins. They're typically dry and sometimes have snow in them. Those are the emergency storage ponds. The ones that we primarily would use, which are ponds A, B, and then 2 through 5. Pond 1 has been sold, and that's the piece that bypass bridge goes through. And then we also have ponds D1 and D2, which is that dark blue, whatever you want to call that shape, polygon, that's across from the bus barn. And those ponds we have the ability to pump to from pond B, which pond B would be the furthest downstream pond on the darker green ponds. Any questions on that slide?
I'm just curious, operationally, we've got the concrete pond here that we use first in terms of
Ballast
attenuating flow. What's that?
Ballast
pond.
ponds.
Right. And then if that starts to reach capacity, that's when we're looking at some of these other ponds for temporary storage, is that correct?
So ballast ponds are used on more kind of think of an hourly basis to attenuate flows to while the rates fall. Things that are where you're going to exceed your daily volume that you want to treat, we would send to our emergency retention basin, which is the large. Can't really see it on this map, but on the painting there, that far right behind the whiteboard, it's
Okay.
an earthen clay lined pond.
That's here near the plant?
That's here near the plant, just
Okay.
down at that end. We would shade flow there first.
Yeah.
And then once that got to a level that we wanted to stop and reserve some capacity in that pond for in-plant stuff, we would then go to some of these other ponds.
And would we go to D1 and D2 first and then?
No, so typically it's pond B first, which is the one that's furthest downstream of the green.
Yeah.
And then pond A next, which is the furthest upstream on the green strip.
Those are clay lined?
Those are clay lined. And then after B and A were filled, then we would kick pumps on and pump up to D1 and D2 by virtue of the fact that those are the next best ponds, though unlined. They're the furthest from the river.
Unlined further from the river, and then the ones that are unlined closer to the river are the last ones that we would use.
Correct, yeah. And pond 3 is lined, clay lined, and that's in the green strip there. But it's relatively small and you can't easily pump to it from it. So that's the next in line after D1, D2 is to go to pond 3. And then your last choices are 2, 4, and 5, which are the unlined ones in the green strip.
We ever put any water in D1 or D2?
I'm sorry, what was it?
Have we ever had a scenario where we've needed to pump up to D1 and D2?
Not that I've been here, and I've heard that there was during the flood event of 97 that they came this close to turning on the pumps.
Okay.
But that they were able to avoid it.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Next slide. So this slide shows locations for potential future plant facilities. And while the master plan doesn't get into great detail in terms of where certain facilities would land, a lot of the facilities that take this kind of real estate are ponds, equalization ponds. And what makes the most sense is that those equalization ponds would be either at the front end of your plant to equalize raw flows as they're coming in, or ponds down at the far tail end of the plant that by gravity that they can get to no matter where you are in the plant. So those two areas are just kind of highlighted as potential. There are master plan ponds that are contemplated, large equalization ponds. So these are probably the best areas that we want to try to preserve, for future frontage. Any questions on that? And next slide, please. Okay, so there are 3 airport safety zones. There's only 2 shown because the third, I'll describe the third first just to knock it out of the way. The third airport safety zone is basically 150 feet above the elevation of the airport. And what that it says basically we don't want anything poking up into that 150-foot altitude space. So no skyscrapers and no large towers that a plane could crash into. So because I'm thinking that none of the contemplated uses of our land would involve buildings that are 150 feet tall, I'm just covering that one verbally.
And that's for the entire 930 plus acres?
Yeah, it is, because forget the radius, that's a fairly large radius on that covers all of Martis Valley, and then some beyond that. So you're left with Zone 1 and Zone 2. Zone 1 is the closest to the airport landing strip. And to familiarize yourself on that, as you're driving out the plant and you hit the stop sign, you're staring at the bare hill in front of you. That's kind of where, on top of that hill is where the airport, where the runway is. And so it's in front of that. That's Zone 1, so kind of think of it as where the dog walking area is. That's where Zone 1 is. And on the far left of this slide, there's a highlighting summary of what's allowed and what's disallowed, prohibited in that area. What's allowed: transportation, communications, utilities, railroads, highways, and streets. And prohibition is on buildings, structures, fences, above-grade transmission lines, above-grade flammable explosives, and any use that's going to result in greater than 10 people per acre at any time. Apparently these are FAA rules. There's FAA documents that you can go into for further detail on that. Zone 2, which is more kind of extending out over some of Teichert's operations and over our effluent disposal field, allows single and two-family residences, some industrial manufacturing uses, for example, food, textile, lumber, warehouses, stone, clay, glass, and metal industries. And then it prohibits any use where it results in greater than 25 people per acre in any 24-hour period, or greater than 50 people per acre at any time, and then ignore the third bullet. That was an error. That should be on there, the one that says greater than 10 people. Basically, this gives an outline as to what FAA is saying would be an allowable use for those spaces. Finally, also shown on this is the salmon-colored blob over that location where we are looking at the second effluent disposal field. That's identified in the airport district's publications as an emergency landing zone, which they have a half dozen of these around the airport. It's just, here's when you read it, it's just basically saying, here's an open area with lots of sagebrush and there's some occasional boulder, land carefully in this area. I believe my understanding is that would be something that we'd be able to negotiate with the airport district if we were going to say, hey, that's off the table. They'd have to find some other spot. I'm not confident of that. I'm just thinking that that's probably.
I don't think there's. I think it's just like, hey, there's an open field over there. Heads up if you're about to crash. Head that way.
Yeah. Not the other way into the Teichert asphalt hot plant.
Right.
So the lower portion of that comprises part of the land swap, kind of the belly of it.
Yes, it does. Yeah. The part that's where you can see the numbers 490411.
Right.
Any other questions here? Okay, next slide, please. So this one just simply shows the Lexi Trail, rough alignment there, the dashed pink dots. Just in terms of future use of the land, that knowing that that's where the easement runs through. Any questions there? Next slide, please. Radial distances. So this is the I call this the prickly porcupine slide. How far away do you want to keep people from you? Usually it's for things like chemical exposures. Sometimes it's things for like vandalism and making sure strangers don't walk into your property. But basically what I did is I took the epicenter being this building and then drawing circles around that at quarter-mile increments up to 1 mile distance, and then I went to half-mile increments. So just it's more of a reference check for when you're looking at any particular land, how far away it would be. Does come into play sometimes when you have a chemical release and you have to exclude certain areas that you'd be interested in looking at this case. Any questions? Okay, next slide. So this is the one where it smashes all those together into one slide, into a kaleidoscope. Every color of the rainbow is probably on there. So the best way to look at this slide is if you're looking for the land that has no encumbrances on it or very few, you look for the light blue, which is the original slide, which shows what we own. And what you can see is just to the right of if you look at the green areas on the left side of the slide, to the right of that green area is this blue spot with the text PF 152 acres. That area of our land is the most unencumbered. You have ponds D1 and D2, and you have the Lexi Trail, and you have the bus barn lease. but there's pretty large swaths of land that are not uncovered. Another way to look at this is to look at how many items are layered on top of each other. So, if you took the airport landing zone 2, like safety zone 2, you can see, okay, we got Tykert leases under there. We have the disposal field. We have a reclaimed area for Tykert. You're touching the edge of the water reclamation facility. Looking at this slide, when you're looking at multiple layers, it gets more difficult to contemplate the land use in that area. Anyway, hopefully this is of use to be able to help you hone in on the discussion that I think is going to follow this presentation.
Great. Thanks, Jay.
Sure.
Any additional comments, Richard?
Not at this point. We figured we'd let the board embark in a conversation on what you see as possible uses, future uses. We've been approached, as you know, by several that are interested in possible land use. Town of Truckee was approached by Tom Donner PUD is looking for a new home.
For their maintenance yard?
Yes.
You say Tahoe Donner? Truckee Donner.
Sorry, Truckee Donner. Too many acronyms. TDPUD. Parks and Recreation has reached out, as you know, the Recreation District. So there's more and more becoming interested. Fire Department, we had a presentation from them. So a lot to consider. I think from a staff standpoint, I think we would like to know what the board's ultimate direction is. Should we do more research, provide more information to help make decisions, or I think what's the fundamental direction?
Right. So I think part of what kicked this conversation off for me was the fire district coming forward with an idea of a training facility on our property. There's been other ideas over the years I've heard from different entities about things that could be done out here. My observation from prior to being on the board and being on the board is that TTSA has taken a fairly consistent approach of holding its land as passive open space, with the one exception being the lease that was done with the school district quite a while ago for the bus maintenance facilities. And more recently, and I think by and large other agencies and the private sector has understood that that's been kind of TTSA's approach, and I think that we haven't had a whole lot of people coming to us. Dale's our historian, so he can fill in a lot more than I can, at least recently, because I think the word was on the street that TTSA wasn't interested in other activities on its land, and passive open space is what we were wanting to maintain out here. So,
I think besides it, that's where the land was given to us through the state of California as a buffer.
I don't know. I don't know the history of how we acquired the land.
Dale, wasn't that through the state of California, the idea that we would use it as a buffer? Or acreage?
Are you able to hear us, Dale?
The state of California, when we got the property, Oz Butterfield had most of what to do with it. All of the property that we acquired from the state of California was a security zone and a buffer zone for the operation of the plant, and it was for the protection and safety of the public. And, as far as, the past goes, we've had so many people. The worst one of all was a good buddy of mine, Dan Wilkins, in his presentation with a legacy trail that went through, and it went on for at least a year where we had to sit back and endure a barrage of reasons why we should give up part of our property for the legacy trail. And you know what, Dan? It was good. It was good. There's been a lot of positive feedback from it, but there's also been a lot of people that's applied for use of our property, from burning, a green waste and green waste disposal and automobile storage for impounded vehicles. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And everybody's looking for free land, and they think that TTSA's got it. And I just want to sit back and maintain Oz Butterfield's philosophy, and it may be wrong, but this plant is got to be operated as safe and in a manner that is safe for the public, and that is the reason why we got the land. And the intent was security, not for 40 years or 50 years later that we go into the real estate business.
Thanks, Dale. And I think, just for clarification, I think this all used to be private property out here. I think the state's involvement was when there was a decision made to export all of the effluent from the Tahoe Basin and to build a regional wastewater treatment plant. I think there was a lot of state money that came available at that time to help fund that endeavor. And so I think a lot of this was private land owned by ranchers and sheep farmers that was purchased and then converted into public open space, which is what we currently have. So,
I've said this before, but my feeling is no matter what gets put on the land around here, we're ended up responsible for what shows up at well 31 down at the other end. And that fire department thing, I didn't like the idea of that at all. And then they were showing a race course on there for the highway patrol. I was thinking, oh man, what else is going to get dumped on the ground? And whatever goes in the ground shows up at well 31. And guess who gets blamed for that? So that's where I'm at about it. I want to leave it open.
So you have no interest in seeing other activities on TTSA property?
And that's a very selfish position on my part. I don't want to be responsible for what somebody else dumps on the land here.
Yeah, I think, so my perspective on that is if someone shows up with a fuel truck and dumps a load of fuel on the side of Georgia Drive, we're not responsible for that. They are.
If you catch them.
Sure, right. So, recognizing that, we monitor well 31, and we have a lot of other monitoring stations. If we, find evidence of soil contamination or other activities, doesn't automatically make it our fault. Just means we're the ones that found out about it, and and it means that maybe we're looked at to see if are we potentially the responsible party. But if we're not, it doesn't make it our fault.
Right, but on the same issue though, if there is something in the soil, we're basically pushing it through into the river. And would we be tasked to fill our ponds? I don't know how it all goes. It just seems to me that I don't want to see anything. Mm-hmm. Development on this land I think puts us at risk.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, Dale used the term security and buffer zone. Is that security, what does all that mean? I know that somebody else had mentioned releasing gas, and that's a very nebulous thing for me. I can think of all types of things. without knowing exactly what it means, it's kind of hard for me to say yes or no to anything.
Yeah. What are, do you hear the question there, Dale?
I don't, I need to really get what Director Wilson had to say about. Could you repeat that real quick, sir?
Yeah, you would use the term security and buffer zone. That's a term that it sounds like was 50 years ago. To me, it could be all kinds of things.
Well, here's the thing. It all revolves around when this plant was built and the reason we acquired the land. And it was all based on protecting the public from what the agency did with toxic chemicals and so on and so forth. And it was very clear and very clearly stated. Now I'm just repeating some of the things that Oz Butterfield said back in the day, but this was a situation that this property that we now hold was supposed to be for security and safety reasons. When you talk about a buffer, I think that goes in maybe a different category, but security and safety should be the paramount thing that we as directors should uphold. And like I say, this property was given to the public, and we are trustees of this property. And unless the state of California comes in and mandates something else, this is property that is under our jurisdiction and under our protection, and it really bugs me when members of the public come and try to get land from us if they know that it's public land owned by all of the 5 member agencies. And it's just, the school district, when they came in, the argument that they had is all of the districts paid in to what we own as an agency, and that was their foothold and toehold to get the bus barn in. Well, after that, they wanted to put in refrigeration, and they wanted to put in office space, and they wanted to put in this and that. And it's just a never-ending barrage of requests that have came into this agency over the past. And, we have a responsibility, and that's to protect and have a safety zone, and we should maintain it at all costs. And the Legacy Bike Trail was one thing. The impact was minimal. It served the public. We've had many people come in to write letters and call us and tell us how wonderful the facility is. But when it goes any further than beyond that, I like the old Butterfield doctrine, and that is stay away. And that's all I can say. It's if this is going to go on and on and on, as long as we have this undeveloped property and people see an opportunity to get something for nothing, they're going to be knocking at our door.
Yeah. So thanks for your comments, Dale. So I share some of your sentiments, and I have different opinions on some. So I agree that the plant operation and plant security is paramount. The question is how much is enough, for me. I travel a little bit, in other parts of the state, and it's not uncommon for, wastewater treatment plants to have, I think it's very uncommon for wastewater treatment plants to have the amount of land that we do. for small plants like ours. And it's a luxury, right? So I think we probably end up with fewer nuisance complaints, because we don't have development close to our plant, smelling, the plant, some of the odors that can come out of the plant. From a safety standpoint, it's a question of how close is too close, and that's, you could argue that, we should be acquiring more land, to create more setback. So that's a bit of a nebulous term for me. When I think about our role in the region, our primary role is for wastewater treatment. But my opinion is that what TTSA did with the school district was a good thing. There was another public agency who, in that case, is charged with educating our youth that needed land to help support their mission. And the fact that TTSA was willing to work with them to help that's, in my opinion, that's good government as opposed to bad business. And in my opinion, I think there could be other opportunities for that we should be open to. I'm not interested in dealing with a bunch of private real estate speculators or developers. For me, the line, in my mind, if TTSA is contemplating allowing use of its property or potentially selling some of its property to others, is that it should be other public agencies, and if we're going to do it, it should be done in a way that really minimizes TTSA's future responsibilities, if you will. I could argue that owning a land lease with someone else's having land that we lease to someone else that we let them put buildings on, that almost feels more cumbersome than just selling the land to them. I'm also not necessarily of a mind that we should be giving land away. What's in my mind is if there's other public agencies who are interested in purchasing TTSA land at fair market value that's kind of on the periphery of our operation that can provide value to the public in different ways that maybe is more beneficial than passive open space, that we should be open to that notion. I understand the slippery slope argument that Dale's making, that basically just saying no, stay away, is the simplest from our perspective. It doesn't get us into the business of, selling land, dealing with other public agencies. That takes time. It can be argued would be a distraction from our main mission, which is wastewater treatment. But by the same token, we need to, I think, be open to the notion that we as an agency, because of our land holdings, can potentially be a benefit to the community in ways other than purely wastewater treatment. And if that involves, surplusing land that's kind of further away from our plant that we're not likely ever going to use for anything, that's something I think we should be open to considering. So I know that's a completely different opinion than you have, Dale.
Can I step in for just a second, Dan?
Absolutely.
And Andrew, I have to ask you this because you are now our attorney. We, like I say, and this is all historical. It's all on paper. The California legislature deeded us over this land as a security and safety zone for operation of the plant. And before we as a board start making any kind of decision about dispersing this land, if we think it's too much, I think that we ought to go back to the California State Legislature or some way or somehow to get a legal opinion, because sitting back, and I understand what you're saying, Dan, about being good governance and being good neighbors and all of that, you know, and when we were listening to the arguments that you brought before the board on the Legacy Trail as a representative of the town of Truckee, you had consultants come before us and tell us that there were subdivisions that used to butt right up to a property line on water treatment facilities and situations like that throughout the state of California. That may be true. We acquired this land from the state of California through the legislature, and before we start making any kind of decision about turning some of this land use as being good neighbors, I think that we ought to check with the state of California and find out that if we can do this, because the way I look at it, the land that our plant is sitting on theoretically is owned by the state of California. They're the ones that give it to us, that gave it to us to provide our operation and our public utility. And I think we ought to be very cautious on where we're headed with this discussion, because we may be stepping out of line.
So your point.
We ought to have council find out whether or not we can legally and lawfully relinquish land holdings that the state of California gave to this agency for safety and security.
So your recommendation, Dale, and I think it's a good one, is that we find out if there's any deed restrictions on the property that limit its eligible uses that kind of date back to when it was acquired, or if there's any other kind of prior obligations that we as TTSA made potentially to granting agencies that may have been involved with providing money to help purchase the land, those kinds of things. And I think that's a great suggestion.
Yeah, and also, Dan, and fellow board members, when you really take a close look and consideration of what we're talking about, if we're giving up property that was given to us by the state, it's public land and it's public property. And there's also the thing that everybody talked about is the gift of public funds or the gift of public property. I think I don't want to sound like a lawyer, but we're stepping on some pretty shaky grounds here, and we better be very careful.
Yeah, and I agree. I just want to be specific. Where my head's at is if we have land that's kind of I'll call it on the periphery of our holdings, that is not critical to our wastewater treatment function, that we could sell at fair market value, use the proceeds from those land sales to help fund capital projects or other plant activities, some of which could be safety upgrades. I think our biggest safety concern is the use of chlorine. And if we could, sell land that's not important to us, use the proceeds from that to, fund a project that gets rid of chlorine gas or liquid chlorine and the potential for release of that, there's potentially ways to make the plant safer, even though we end up with less land at the end of the day. That's a scenario. So I'm not suggesting we should just be looking at and opening up the floodgates, saying, "Hey, who wants free land out here on Georgia Drive?" and come and get it. It's more of a, I think the message on the street right now is don't even talk to us. And I think the question is, are we open to people talking to us? I fully agree with you, Dale, that we need to understand the history of how the land was acquired and any legal encumbrances that come along with that acquisition that could limit our ability. But I think, again, where I'm at, I understand it's a different place than where Dale's at and where Dave is at, but that's why we have a 5-member board. So I've been talking a lot.
I'm looking at it, and I could not agree more with what Dale said. I think that's the fundamental step we all need to determine. And once we get that answer, I'm looking at the map, and Jay, thank you very much, because I keep going back to that light blue area that is what President Wilkins says. That's on the periphery. And another thing I truly believe is that we've had the Legacy Trail that I think everybody here would agree has been very positive for the community as a whole. The Tahoe Truckee Unified School District bus shed, I agree. I think that was something that was fundamentally needed, and we were able to help them with that. I think it's a step, and I don't hear anybody saying we want to move ahead fast by any means. I think we have to work our way through it, but I am a huge believer that there are a lot of other public agencies here that, because our communities as a whole have changed so much in the last 50 years, there are different needs. There are new needs that 50 years ago nobody ever thought of, and I think we need to take that into account. And to your point, Dan, if there's agencies out there, when we get to a point where we say, yes, this would work, and they want to pay fair market value, I think it'd be a very reasonable opportunity to say, okay, how can we reduce the chlorine? Things of that nature. I think it's a very complicated issue, but I think we need to take a very realistic, slow approach to it and start off with the fundamental piece that they
I'd like to hear from Andrew.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Director Cox, so in thinking about the process by which the agency would look at any restrictions on disposing of land, I'd agree with President Wilkins. We'd look at deed restrictions on the property, but in terms of the legislature expressing how the agency would dispose of surplus land, we'd look at both the Agency Act or how the legislature sort of set forth the purpose of the agency and its process for disposal of land. I'm not aware if there's anything in the Act that covers this, but that would be sort of our guiding document. And then we'd look at general state statute, like the Surplus Lands Act. That would be the process that the agency would have to follow if it were to look to wholesale dispose of public lands and determine whether we had to follow the Surplus Lands Act or an exemption from it. And there's a whole process that we could detail. But that would be the general inquiry that the agency would have to follow. Deed restrictions, Agency Act, surplus land.
Okay. Blake?
You guys have covered, I think, the topics pretty well. I think I sit, somewhere in between all of this, and interested to see what comes out of this additional research. If things get complicated quickly, if we ended up moving towards any decision to make lands available, how we end up doing that. And, I guess part of the question I'd ask for you, Andrew, is this concept of if there's no restrictions and we decided to make land surplus, can you restrict that to only public agencies, or is that I don't even know if that's viable. If we're really trying to get fair market value, can you restrict who can bid on that? Leasing gives us greater flexibility, but I'm not in a rush either on this. Again, Jay, great job of putting the map together. That's really helpful. A lot of stuff in there that I wasn't aware of, and so that helps me also. So I think think we've identified some good steps forward and continue to have the discussion as that information comes up.
So is the suggestion that we ask for an agenda item sometime in the not too distant future, where Andrew could do some research, come back to us, give us information about any encumbrances that may exist, either from the creation of TTSA or the funding that was used to purchase the land or deed restrictions. Do a little research there, and then also maybe educate us on what the process is for selling land, and then kind of see where that dialogue leads. Is that the suggestion?
Yeah.
President Wilkins, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think all of that can be done without identifying any specific property except for the deed restriction. I think there would be a significant cost to the agency if we were to look at everything. Perhaps if we look at maybe a representative property, maybe the one that seems to be less encumbered as sort of a test case. And
Pull a title report on that.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
see what pops up. How's that sound to you, Dale?
Dan, you know how I feel about this.
Yeah.
If I had my say and I wanted to do a development on TTSA property, I'd have a high altitude NASCAR track. But as it stands, you know, I hate to be older in this conversation, but I'm going to stand with what I call the Butterfield Doctrine, and I just want people to stay away from our facilities, stay away from our grounds, and let us do what we're supposed to do, and that's treat effluent. Everybody else stay away. Like I say, I hate to have that attitude, but you know, it's old school. It's old school. You know,
Right.
I'm indoctrinated.
I appreciate knowing exactly where you stand on it, Dale. Okay. So I think there's a request by a majority of the board to bring some further information back to us. Richard, you get the first joy as a general manager of being in a conversation where you've got diametrically different opinions amongst different board members. So good luck with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think, unless there's further dialogue on this item, then we'll move on. Okay? All right, thanks. Next on our agenda is management team report, department reports. See you, Sean.
Thank you all. See you all.
Thank you.
Good morning, President Wilkins, Board of Directors. I know we used a lot of time, so I'll just kind of hit the highlights of the operations report so we can kind of get through it quicker. All plant discharge requirements were met for the month. We did have a monitoring and reporting of the BOD sample that was not reported, which is part of our monthly requirement. And that was reported to Lawton, and that was due to a lab quality control issue. The plant performed well. One of the highlights that I'll bring up, and I get to be one of the first ones to talk about it, I'm going to take everybody else's thunder, is that the sodium hypochlorite pilot project for effluent disinfection was put in service in January. And we've been doing testing, and actually we are now on full sodium hypochlorite for disinfection of the effluent, and all chlorine gas has been removed from the plant and is off-site. So the chlorine facility, and this is to facilitate the scrubber replacement project. So we've basically gotten rid of all the departments pulled together. It was a really great thing to watch with engineering and maintenance and admin coming together and putting this project together so that we could have disinfection and get the project moving for the chlorine gas.
So, a question on that, Mike, and good job on that. So we're doing this as a really a temporary thing, so that we can accomplish the scrubber work. What's the potential of it being a permanent solution for us? Is that what we're trying to get information on?
Yes.
Okay.
And so
More to
far,
come on that.
Yeah, there's very limited data points so far, and the main thing that we're going to be looking at, there's a few things. The biggest thing that we'll be looking at is the TDS addition. That, you know, in the past, whenever we've brought up sodium hypochlorite, that's always been an issue, is the amount of TDS that is added to the effluent because of the sodium portions of the hypochlorite. So far, with limited data, it looks like, because as I've reported before, we do add so we have gaseous chlorine that makes a chlorine solution. There is some TDS that's added by that. It's pretty small amounts, but there is TDS that's added. And then we also, to maintain that neutral pH, have to add the caustic to the effluent, because the gaseous chlorine does drive the pH down on the effluent. And to meet our requirements of well 31, we have the caustic, which also adds TDS. As of right now, with the information we have, it looks like it's almost, by eliminating the caustic and the gaseous chlorine, because with the sodium hypochlorite, it actually increases the effluent pH a little bit instead of decreasing it. So we were able to shut the caustic off. It looks like so far it's about a wash with the amount of TDS that's actually being added to the effluent for that sodium hypochlorite addition for disinfection. And we're also working on dosing. We started off at the same chlorine residual that we had with gaseous chlorine, and we're going to be experimenting with that to try to see if we can actually have a little bit lower chlorine residual and maintain the disinfection that we need to meet our requirements. And that would also drive down the amount of TDS and also cost.
Right. Thanks. And just curious with the chlorine issue. I mean, my sense is that if there was a way to move away from chlorine long term, permanently,
that is the hope.
That staff would. I mean, staff's the one that.
The hope is that we never bring chlorine gas back to the facility ever again.
Okay.
That's the end goal.
That would be.
There is some cost differences, but there's a lot of cost savings with the chlorine gas being gone that you can't see in requirements for CalARP, safety trainings, ASUITs, SCBAs. There's a lot of a little apples to apples cost comparison. The hypo looks like, just by itself, it's about 3 times more expensive than the chlorine. But there's a whole lot of savings on the other side to the agency that are hard to see, that at the end of the day would probably be more of a wash. And one of the biggest ones would be the safety to the public.
Right.
Because
not to mention the staff, they'd probably be more than happy to not have to work around chlorine if it can be avoided.
Yes. So lots of excitement. We're really hoping that this is something that we can move forward with in the future.
Mike, the sodium hypochlorite comes in a liquid form?
Yes, it's basically bleach.
Okay, and it's trucked here on a weekly basis or something?
It's right now it's about every 2 weeks.
Okay.
We set the temporary facility up. You probably saw the
pictures.
Can you go to the slide with the chlorine, please? Oops, wrong presentation. We need February's.
It's okay.
The follow-up question was, there's a driver in potentially going to sodium hypochlorite to get away from the concerns with chlorine gas, but really what drove this project also had to do with the additive change order we were looking at from the contractor was putting in the temporary scrubbing system. And so I'm wondering, and we approved, some expenditures here to possibly save money on not having that additive change order, and so money from a contracting standpoint, where we're at with that contractor.
And I'll let Jay speak to that.
Yeah, so contractor has started. They started on Monday removing snow. They are now able to do the job without chlorine in the building. So huge benefit to plant and public safety. And yeah, it's enabled, so that this is kind of killing two birds with one stone, and enables the contract to proceed in a much more safe fashion, and then it allows us to pilot test the sodium hypochlorite and see, is this viable for future disinfectant?
And that $100,000+ kind of change order, I think that we approved a few months ago for the, temporary scrubbing system while they did this, is that been?
That did not go before the contractor, because now we've given them no excuse not to get the work done.
Right.
So any delay on his part is his own decision.
Right.
Not that there couldn't be future change orders, right? Then something, but like in terms of what we were contemplating with that delay, we no longer had to go there. So
We were contemplating an agency order delay. We don't need to do that now, so now
Right.
it's contractor has no reason to say we delayed them.
Okay.
And it is correctly used. I mean, on the board's authorization, some of those funds we use, intend to use towards this project. But it could come at great benefit to TTSA on many different reasons, instead of just giving the money away to some contractor that walks away at the end of the day.
If the sodium hypochlorite system proves to be the way to go, what type of infrastructure changes would we need?
So fortunately, these systems are very simple. You have the storage tank with the delivery system like you would with most tanks. You have a pair of pumps or bank of pumps, and then you have some piping / tubing, and then an injection point. Very simple when you compare it to the existing chlorine system, and even simpler when you compare it to like a future UV system, which would be orders of magnitude more complicated than that. So in general, these facilities are pretty straightforward. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of industry experience with this product. A lot of plants have moved to sodium hypochlorite, and they're easy to engineer, easy to build, easy to start up and operate and maintain.
Thank you.
Much more simple than the chlorine facility. Any other questions for operations department report?
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, and thanks to everyone for thinking creatively around this issue. It's kind of interesting that this thing with the contractor kind of manifested itself into what it is. So it's good.
Yeah. Thank you. Lots of teamwork. Thank you.
All right. Next on department reports.
So today we have Tanner. Tanner, we've been doing 2-month rotations, kind of filling in as a maintenance manager. So Tanner filled up this month. And unfortunately, the normal presentation we don't have the right one from Rochelle.
Okay.
With her being out, so we'll just jump over to the actual manager report so you can get some photos.
Okay.
You can.
Okay, so do
Well, good afternoon, President Wilkins, Board of Directors, Tanner McGinnis, Maintenance Supervisor, Interim Maintenance Manager. The month of January for our group was definitely dominated by sodium hypochlorite. Every member of our group had a hand in kind of developing that whole thing, making it happen, ranging from developing some supply piping for taking deliveries, to discharge piping, heat tracing, developing a pump skid, running discharge tubing, putting an injection quill into the final effluent pipe, the IT department, D&I folks have been putting together automation for it, level instrumentation, all trying to make it as usable as possible for operations. So, with a pretty tight timeline, these guys pulled it together very effectively, and it's been a pretty resounding success from our perspective so far. So, in addition to kind of the sodium hydrochloride project, there's a lot of ongoing things related to firewall configuration and installation, testing involving that. Rolled out a new TTSA website at ttsa.ca.gov. That was rolled out in January. We've got a few different IT components that have been worked on regularly. SCADA IT master plan, LIMS installations are kind of ongoing, multi-month efforts. So those things are keep continuing. And then we had our normal things fail, and just keeping the facility up to date. We did have boiler number 2 repaired. It had a pressure vessel failure, so that was repaired and put back into service. All staff has been upgrading electrical overloads throughout the facility. It gives them increased flexibility to troubleshoot and make changes without exposing live conductors. A little bit more modern technology, so it's a great upgrade that's happening there. We've got some upgrades going on in the maintenance shop, so if you go to the next page, there's some flooring that has been put into the area that will become the new E&I office. So put in some luxury vinyl tile in that area, similar to what's in the admin building here, installed in-house by staff, and a lot of upgrades involving kind of making that area a little bit nicer, so some ongoing improvements. We did some repairs to some HVAC system controls around the facility for the operations facility or operations office. Rebuilt a couple of large progressing cavity pumps for the centrifuge feed pump. And then Paul's team's also been upgrading LED lighting throughout the facility. So in January, they took on the RAS process in Building 53. So that helps increase our safety and energy efficiency as well. And then, as was alluded before, there's always a vehicle was taken so that we could refuel the generators on the TRI, because we've had power outages and things. So multiple TRI sites had to be powered off of local generators. Just kind of keep things alive in that regard. Aside from that, the number of work orders in the group that were completed, there's a whole list of those there. Lighter than usual, given the special project that consumed a lot of the staff time. But,
Great.
Anything, questions for the ministry?
Questions from the board?
Nope.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Tanner. Jay?
Good morning again. So, interim report. I'd also like to start with the HYPO project. Thanks to all the departments for pitching in on that. I wanted to just add the perspective that usually it's in planned emergencies where you see everybody kind of like come together and work well, all for the same common cause without any friction, and everybody rolling up their sleeves and just jumping in without hesitation and with enthusiasm. It's those unexpected emergencies, where people come together. And I saw that on this HYPO job, and it wasn't an emergency. It was like, it wasn't really a planned project either, but it was not one of those kind of like you go in for the day on an emergency and then you're done and you walk away. It was every day for a number of weeks, everybody working really well together. and everybody kind of behind this and going, yeah, this sounds right, this is exciting. Just very refreshing to see, so just wanted to talk about it. So in the month of January, we got the PDR finalized for the digestive improvement study. The additional boiler heating redundancy design project, we're waiting on parts on that. The chlorine scrubber improvements project, as I mentioned, we're under construction this week. Control room upgrade project, we're in closeout. Filter influent condition assessment, waiting on equipment. Plant coating project, roof repair project, we're closed out in January. And then finally, the disinfection pilot project. There's a couple of photos there, very similar to what you've seen already. Any questions?
No. Thanks, Jay.
Okay, thank you.
Dale, I assume you didn't have any questions on the department reports as of yet?
I'm okay with it.
Okay. And Crystal's up.
I appreciate being Tanner talks quieter than I do. For the finance team, we had the auditors come the first week of January for final field work, audit field work. Wrapping up some items with them still not complete. We set up positive pay to enhance our internal, to put more internal controls on when we spend money. We attended the finance committee meeting, completed the 1099s and W-2s. The entire department went to the GASB Gap Update annual training, was here just on webinar. And the billing department, we got out Celeste got out the January billings and was very instrumental and a big part of the connection fee and rate fee study. In the purchasing area, one of the biggest things that Haley had to do was do all the purchases for the sodium hypochlorite project. And then I think that's pretty much summarizes it for everybody. For all the departments, we had, for connection fees, we had 7 residential permits, 3 residential with additions, 1 accessory dwelling unit, and 3 total, but 2 of them were exempt, and then 1 commercial. And that's it.
Thanks, Crystal. Any questions for Crystal?
No.
No. General Manager's report.
They stole all my thunder on the sodium hypochlorite, but I do want to express my thanks to all the groups that worked on it. Unique opportunity in my career to see you have operations, who's always a real conservative one, wants to prove everything out. You have the engineering group who wants to design everything and make sure it's perfect. We won't leave Crystal and her group out, the ones who get tasked with buying everything, and the maintenance group that's just like, just give us all the parts and let us throw it together. And you got to see all 4 of those pieces come together in a rapid time frame, and it was a lot of fun to watch and be involved in. And as they said, it's going extremely well. And my intent will be to come back to the board of directors soon, looking to authorize us to spend money on building a permanent installation, utilizing mostly in-house staff and skills to keep the cost down. So just fly through connection fee and rate study was a big one for the month for myself, working with Crystal. Jump down to the disinfection was another one that we were all involved in. New website went live, as mentioned. Had the opportunity to meet with Jen Calloway, town manager, and get to know her. Met with Brian Wright, general manager at Tahoe Donner, Truckee Donner PUD, TD PUD, sorry, and their interest in land, as I mentioned earlier. Been attending the member district board meetings and giving presentations, so hopefully those have gone over well with those boards, and you guys have gotten good feedback, I believe. Attend the local GM meeting, and then continue to work on lining up leadership training for staff, working with Vicki, and then of course the policies were brought before you. And just to give a little point on that, our intent is to bring 2 to 3 policies each month as we build the administrative manual and get those standalone policies going, so you'll see those coming each month, and I'll weigh them out based on the agenda and timing. Most of them aren't critical. So. Kind of quick rundown.
Thanks, Richard. Any questions or comments for Richard?
Just comment. Alpine enjoyed your presentation when they came in here. You were well received. And that was a good one.
Good, thank you.
Alan?
Say, we'll check it
I'm
out,
at the
BD.
TSA board meeting, I'll call you back.
Okay.
Okay.
If there's no further comments on the management team reports, the next item is an opportunity for any member of the board to provide any comments for the good of the order. Blake?
Yeah, so one, I want to thank Richard, the CW local section of CWA, that's the association that represents the wastewater industry, had their local section banquet, and it was great to see. I attended and saw Richard there, as well as Jason Hayes, the lab director, who's stepped up to be on the board there. And so express my appreciation for you guys' participation at the event and in that section as a whole. And then secondly, I'd like to make the recommendation that I think I'd like to see a resolution of appreciation from the board to staff on the response for the sodium hypochlorite, a formal board recognition. And if you want to toss a little party, that sounds like a great job on all your parts. And I just really want you guys to know, I think you're all proud of what you did, but I think you should hear it from the board as well, that we really support that, and love to see that teamwork. And there's so many positive benefits from this. So possibly bring a board resolution of appreciation to staff regarding that to the next board meeting.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Yeah, and I think what I wasn't appreciating was that this was potentially a permanent option. I knew we were doing like a test case and see how it worked, but I was assuming after that was over, after the construction was over, we were going back to the chlorine system, but it sounds like the jury's still out on that, but we're hoping to avoid that as possible.
Yes, the big unknown was the TDS impact. We knew we could, even if it increased it, we knew we could do it for a period of time because of the way we sample. But then I think all of us had it in our back pocket, I think, hoping undersell, over deliver. And then as the sampling is proving out to be very positive, and the positive reception by all staff of waving goodbye to the cylinders as they left, I think
Right.
has kind of morphed it into another phase that we would like to move forward with if
Right.
it all proves out.
That's great. And we recognize that there's still more time that needs to go by and more data that needs to be collected, but it sounds like things are trending positively for the moment. So that's good. That's great. Any other comments from board members?
I would just like to, it sounds small, but one of the things that really got under my skin was getting on my phone and pulling up the TTSA website and not being able to do anything. And so getting that website to where it is now, I think, is fantastic. I like to surf around on it, and there's a lot more information. It's a lot easier to maneuver. So great job on that one, too.
Great. Dale, did you have comments?
Yes, just a very quick comment. Richard, I want to thank you for your presentation you made to the Olympic Valley Board this past month. You knocked it out of the park, my man. It was very well done.
Thank you, Dale.
Thanks. Okay, with that, we will now move to closed session for one item related to public employee performance evaluation of general manager. Thanks, everyone.